Hey family, welcome back to my video. Today we will see, what if Harry vanished and became the omnipotent demigod? Here is my official Patreon. Please join it because there are many stuffs that I can't share here because of community guidelines. But on my Patreon page, you will get adult Harry stories, Naruto, and Deca 2. Also the quick access for other parts of my story which might take time on YouTube. Also there are many stuffs you will get here. Please consider joining my Patreon. Link in the description. Before we start, I would like to extend my sincere thanks to the original author of this story for granting us permission to use it in our YouTube video. Your generosity is greatly appreciated. The author's creation and the original story's link in the descriptions. Please do check that first. Now enjoy the video. Hogsmeade, are you sure about this? A woman asked the small boy in front of her. You can still go to Ilvermorny. It wouldn't be a problem getting you in as a late enrollment. She sounded worried, if not a bit scared. The woman was of average height and slim build. She wore a dark brown shirt with a flower blooming from a white skull over her modest chest and dark black denim jeans hugging her wide hips. Her skin was in the middle of turning from a light tan to a pale color. Her dark brown eyes are almost black. But the oddest thing about her was her hair. Her long, black, inky hair that went down to her mid-back was turning a bone white from the roots to just above her ear as she stood on the edge of the small town, right outside of the school, near an old abandoned house. The boy looks into her almost black eyes with his stunning emerald eyes. For the 10th time, I'm sure, Mom, besides after all the trouble Milanoe went through stealing the letter and the shopping trip, she'd kill me if I backed out at the last minute. The boy says with a smile, thinking of one of his older sisters. He, like the older woman, was wearing dark clothes, a black t-shirt with a red spider lily and a calla lily growing entwined, and the words "Live for the Dead" underneath them, black jeans with a hole in the right knee, a pair of black trainers, and a baseball cap with a metal plate that read DOA Records, and a leather bomber jacket that seemed to be a size or 3 too big for him. I don't know why I let you two go off by yourselves. All you two do is cause trouble wherever you go, the woman says with a stern look but a fond smile. Oh, come on, the boy says with a scoff. We're not that bad. But the woman gives him a pointed look. Camp Half-Blood 3 weeks ago, she says as if it explained everything. Hey, that wasn't our fault, the boy says, defending himself and his older sister. The Ares cabin started that. We were just helping out the Hermes cabin, the boy says with a cheeky grin. The woman rolls her eyes. I'm sure they did, she says with a sigh, before her face shifts to worry once more. Do you have everything? Trunk? Wand? The despoina? The woman asks. Trunk shrunk and in my pocket, he says as he pats said pocket of his jacket before pointing at his wrist. Wand is in the holster, and the despoina is clipped on the back of my belt like always. He tells her with a soft smile. I've got everything, but we arrived too early. I can't just leave you here, she says, looking around the road that leads to the village up the way. Mom, it's fine. I want to explore the village anyway. It will be fine, the boy says with a roll of his eyes before looking back at the woman. I'll change into my robes when the train gets here and slip in with the first years. They'll never know. And what are you planning to tell them when the 31st rolls around? She asks. Nothing. I'll pretend to be sick in bed until I wake up. It will be fine, Mom, the boy says with a smile. You're worrying too much again. I can't help it. You're finally going to school. I'm allowed to worry, dear, the woman says, bending down and enveloping the boy into a hug. The boy hugs her back with a smile. I know, he mumbles into the crook of her neck, but I'll be fine, you'll see, the boy says as he breaks from the embrace. You know they're all going to freak when they find out, right? The woman says with a smile. Yup, the boy says with a smile, popping his lips at the end. It's going to be great, the woman sighs before shaking her head. Don't forget you own an owl, and write to me if you need anything. Understand? She says, and the boy nods before she just gives him a nod, and the boy turns and starts running towards the village. And no mischief, young man, she yells after him as the boy starts to laugh. No promises, he calls back, and the woman shakes her head once again. Oh, Lily, what am I going to do with that boy of ours? She says quietly with a sigh before scattering into flower petals and disappearing in the wind. Excerpt from the Daily Prophet, December 27th, 1981, The Boy Who Vanished, by senior reporter Hugh Oriest. We all know the story by now. that a little over a month ago the reign of death and terror brought on to us was ended on the night of October 31st. The house still remains a mystery. All we know is that she who must not be named went to the quiet village of Godric's Hollow, intent on killing a small family of three, or James Potter, Lily Evans, and Harry Potter. She had succeeded in ending the life of James Potter and Lily Evans, but somehow was felled by their child, Harry Potter. Chief Warlock Albus Dumbledore, using both the wartime authority of his position and being the executor of the Potter estate granted to him by the now deceased James Potter, had placed Harry Potter in what he had dubbed a safe place with relatives, but as to who he wouldn't say. After the events of that night, the secret keeper, Peter Pettigrew, was arrested and would later escape Auror custody, and two of James Potter's close friends, Sirius Black and Remus Lupin, would comment that had no idea where the chief warlock had placed the young savior of the Wixen Islands. As the last month went by and trials and imperious victims came forward to point fingers and name names, and lest we forget the horrifying attacks on the Longbottom family, everyone seemed to forget about the boy whom we all raised a glass to on November 1st. But late last night, an emergency meeting of the Wisengamot was called. The reason? Harry Potter has gone missing. Apparently, the chief warlock had placed young Harry Potter with relatives of his mother, Lily Evans, to hide him from the remnants of the Dark Lady's forces under a powerful protective ward. But when Albus Dumbledore went to check in on our young savior, he found the Harry Potter missing. New information is still forthcoming, such as what the Wisengamot's reaction to this will be, and what will the Wixen Islands do to find our missing boy who lived. But we here at the Daily Prophet can't help but to ask the hard questions. Why was Harry Potter put with Muggles? If he was behind such a powerful ward, how was he taken? Who has taken him? A deranged fan? Death Eaters still at large? And for what purpose? Will this be the last we hear of our Savior? We, at the Daily Prophet, intend to keep our readers up to date on all these questions and more. But as the days turned to months that turned to years, no new information came forth. The boy who lived had vanished the night of the winter solstice, and was not seen in England again after that. Sirius Black offered a 100,000 galleon reward for either the safe return or information that led to the safe return of Harry Potter after a year of the boy going missing. The reward would remain unclaimed for the next 10 years. Remus Lupin would scour Europe to find the missing boy, but always came back more beaten down and empty-handed. Albus Dumbledore would use his position as supreme mugwump to ask the other nations for help, but most just offered their sympathy and moved on with their own lives and their own nations. Severus Snape would spend his time out of the school he now taught at helping Albus search for the boy he had sworn to protect on the grave of the woman he once loved and still did. He dug into every dark corner of the world to find even a hint of the boy, but found nothing. And after 7 years of no signs of life, Harry Potter was proclaimed dead, and the whole of the Wixen Islands mourned the loss of the last Potter. But still, the four men never stopped looking for the boy. The Potter vaults remained sealed, his name never, leaving the book of names that held every living student or student to be in it at Hogwarts. Hogwarts, Severus Snape. Severus Snape isn't what one would call polite, nice, well-adjusted, or anything remotely good. He was a man haunted by the ghosts of past regrets that he could not exorcise, and he hated the fact that he couldn't. But as he walked the ancient halls of the place that where once he was a student, now a teacher, he honestly wished he could rid himself of those ghosts. He couldn't help but to remember what day it was, September 1st. If all had gone to plan, Lily's son would have been on the train arriving at Hogsmeade Station in only a few short hours. But like everything in his life, nothing had gone to plan. Severus himself was not completely convinced that the boy was dead. When he had disappeared from Tooney's home before the front door was even open, Severus had hit up every contact in the Death Eaters that had escaped Azkaban if that had a hand in it. But the answer was always the same. I wish I had, they had all said in one way or another. It had sickened Severus that he had ever listened to any of them when he was a schoolboy. Noble movement is ours. Then he had dug deep into the seedy underbelly of the Wixen world looking for any hint, any sighting of the boy, while the wolf had searched the whole of Europe. And still nothing. The boy had vanished without a trace. He had failed what he had promised on Lily's grave, and he hated himself even more for it. He had gone back over the years to look under stones he had turned over years before, and still nothing. He had gone so far as the States and Japan in hopes to find anything, but it was like he was chasing ghosts. If the boy was dead, whoever had done it had done a very good job of erasing all evidence of it and would die a very slow death if Severus ever found out who had done it. "Ah, there's tall, goth, and creepy," says a voice from behind Severus as he is leaving the dungeons. He doesn't even begin to hold back the aggravated sigh that escapes his mouth. "What do you want, Twist?" he says as he spins around to look at the second most aggravating woman he had ever met in his life. Olivia Twist was shorter than him, with piercing blue eyes and short blonde hair that stopped just above her ears, and a tan complexion. Her voice was grating because of the thick New York accent that escapes her mouth every time she opened it to speak. The navy and cranberry-trimmed men's dress coat she wore clashed like an eyesore with the green and gold-trimmed vest underneath it with a black blouse and dress pants. She moved like the trained oarer she was for 16 years. Her eyes sparkled with amusement when Severus looked into them. "Oh, why so dour, Severus? You and the rest of the staff are acting like someone died or something," she says, lips quirking into a smile. Severus' scowl deepens as he glares at the woman who has been working at the castle for the last 2 years, going on 3. "I know it may have escaped your obviously short-sighted view of the ongoing of this nation, Twist, but this is the year the Potter boy was to attend Hogwarts. The boy's mother and father was good friends or former pupils of a few on staff," Severus tells Olivia. All the woman does is quirk an eyebrow, as if she was a bit surprised. "That was this year, how sad," she says, not at all sounding it. "What do you want, Twist?" Severus says, voice close to anger. "Geez, calm down, Sev," Olivia says, the smirk never leaving her face. "Do not call me that." Severus snaps at her. "You are to either call me Snape or Professor, not Sev." He says the last word in a horrible back New York accent. "Well, so are our Professor," Olivia says with a chuckle and mocking gesture as Severus fumes. "The old man sent me to collect you for the last staff meeting before the students get here. I drew the short straw to come find your creepy ass. I was just on my way," Severus tells her through clenched teeth. "And I am not creepy, Twist," he says as he brushes past her on his way to the staff room. "Sure, whatever you say, stalker," Olivia says as she follows behind him. "And stop telling people I stalked you," Severus yells as he storms through the corridors with Olivia Twist laughing behind him. Albus Dumbledore, staff room. Albus looks toward the door as it swings open. The last remaining professors joining them, Severus and Olivia, the former's face etched in rage and anger, while the latter had amusement dancing in her eyes. Albus sighs at this. He did wish his teachers would get along better, but it seemed that those two would remain bitter rivals till one of them tries to curse the other. His gold was on Severus firing the first spell. "Ah, excellent. We are all here, so now we can begin with the last staff meeting before the students get here," Albus says with a clap and a smile as Olivia and Severus take the seats as far away as possible from each other. "Is everything prepared for the school year? Does anyone need any last-minute items?" Albus asks his teachers as most shake their heads before Severus looks over at him. While not an immediate concern, the stock of dried lion's mane is low and won't last the term. Lucky. I've already brewed the infirmary's stock of potions for the foreseeable year, the potion master says before Minerva makes a knot on a piece of parchment. Albus nods. "I'll see to it you have a fresh stock by the week's end, Severus," he says before asking another question. "Heads of houses, how are the wards? Have you noticed any problems that need a quick fix?" Albus asks, and it was Pomona who was the one to speak. "While not in Hufflepuff, the wards around the greenhouses aren't functioning properly," the rodent professor says. "Just this morning I found some gripper snaps in my potting soil. I checked them, but I couldn't find a problem with them." Pomona explains and Albus nods again, but is cut off before he could speak. "Oh, Professor, do you mind if I swing by the greenhouse and grab them?" asks Hagrid. "They make a mighty fine treat for the Thestral," the jolly half-giant asks. "Hagrid, if you can get them before the students get here, they're all yours," Pomona says, and Hagrid nods happily. "Excellent, and don't worry, Pomona. I'll check the wards personally after our meeting," Albus says as Pomona thanks him. "Anything else?" The headmaster asks his staff, and he sees Minerva open and closes her mouth, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Minerva?" Dumbledore asks. "Is there something that you think I should know?" He asks one of the teachers with the longest tenure that had taught at the school. Minerva sighs before turning to him. I checked the list of students this morning, Albus. He's still on it, she says in a soft voice, and the mood in the room immediately changes. Hagrid sinks into his chair with a sigh. Flitwick's face twists into a deep sadness, and Severus' face goes blank. What do you want me to do when I get to it tonight? Minerva asks with her own heartbroken tone of voice, and Albus sighs sadly. Perhaps, Albus says slowly, perhaps we skip his name tonight. We need not soil a festive day with such a sad memory. His voice is solemn and soft as Minerva nods sadly. Not quite a dead soul, but not quite living either, Hogwarts. She didn't know what the old goat was thinking when he had told the islands that the boy was still alive. It had confused her when she had found out that almost 3 years ago. Why try and kindle a dead hope? Why keep it alive? Propaganda against her? To keep her followers that had escaped Azkaban scared? She had no clue and was convinced Albus had lost the last of his marbles. After all, she was there that night. She saw her magic carve the wand movement into the boy's forehead. She had seen the light leave his eyes, and the body begin to collapse before Lily Potter's last spell had taken effect and robbed her of her corporeal form. No, Harry Potter was dead. She had killed him herself while the boy was still in the crib. When he wasn't a threat, he had died that night with his parents. Whatever game Dumbledore was playing with the long-dead body of a 1-year-old, she had no clue, but was going to enjoy it when it blew up in his face. Hermione Granger, Hogwarts, the Black Lake. To put it in words on how Hermione Granger felt right now, jubilant would be an understatement. Excited wouldn't cover it, and ecstatic just didn't sum it up. The excitement that buzzed under her skin ever since a year ago when Professor McGonagall had shown up at her home and explained to her and her parents that she was a witch and how she was accepted into a school for witches and wizards had yet to fade. She had practiced the charms and cantrips that wouldn't set off the trace and devoured every book she could get her hands on about the history of the world she had now found herself in and the fascinating theory behind magic and where it had comes from. While some of the things she had read had shocked and disgusted her for a culture almost 200 years behind the Muggle world, the magic and the ability to do it still fascinated her, that not even the ugly truth of the wizened world could bother her. So, when September 1st had finally come, she was awake bright and early to rush her parents out the door and to King's Cross to get aboard the Hogwarts Express an hour early to start her school year. She had met a few kids aboard it as well, the quiet but kind Neville Longbottom, whom she helped to try and find his toad, the rude but oddly funny Ron Weasley, whom she had lost 3 games of chess to, surprisingly enough, the suave but distance-blazed Zebini, the kind and polite Susan Bones, and a rude little roach by the name of Draco Malfoy. Hermione, like her parents, had hoped that this school wasn't like the last 3 she had gone to. She wasn't the most social of children. It also didn't help that the last 3 schools had immature bullies that had harassed her into leaving. No, Hermione had hoped that this year she would finally make some friends. So as she stepped off the train and followed the voice of the frighteningly tall man over to the docks, she had not expected to meet one more person that night. As she went to go sit in one of the boats, she stops as a voice had called out just before she had sat on them. "Watch out," the voice had said, causing Hermione to jump and spin to see a body that she was sure wasn't there a moment ago. "Oh, I beg your pardon, I didn't see you there," Hermione says to the voice that sounded like a boy, but wore the same plain black robes she, herself, wore, and a witch's hat pulled low over his face. They wave it off, speaking again. "Yep, definitely a guy. It's all good, you stopped before we got to the awkward part," the boy says with a shrug. "No harm, no foul." As Hermione sits down in the empty seat next to him, the boy shifts over, keeping the witch's hat over his eyes, but she could see the pale flesh of the boy's jaw. He has an American accent, which throws Hermione off for a moment. She had thought that Hogwarts only accepted children born on the Wixen Islands. "I'm sorry if this seems a bit rude, but are you from England?" Hermione asks the boy, and he nods. "Yeah, I was born here. I just grew up across the pond," he says with a shrug before leaning back as the boats begin to move forward. "Oh, where are my manners?" Hermione says before offering her hand. Hermione Granger, it's nice to meet you. Were you on the train?" she asks after introducing herself. "Mo," the boy says as he takes her hand and shakes it. "Nice to meet you, Hermione. Fair warning, I suck at remembering names. I'll remember your face, just not your name. So just remind me, But no, I live in the village, so no train for me, he says with a roguish grin. Hermione waits a moment as the boy looks around, waiting for the boy to introduce himself. But he never does. As she opens her mouth to ask his name and berate him for being rude, his grin turns into a full-blown smile. Wicked, he whispers, looking forward, and as Hermione turns to see what he was looking at, all thoughts of the boy bleed away as the lights from the castle of Hogwarts illuminate the Black Lake. Hermione wasn't the only one who gasps at the sheer majesty of the castle, and she was sure she wouldn't be the last. The awe, sadly, did not last long as the boats made it to their final destination, a little cove hidden beneath the castle. As the self-rowing boats made landfall, the children quickly climb out and follow the tall man to the door before he turns, checking if everyone was still with him before he hands Neville the toad that the boy lost and knocking on the door. The door opens to a stern-faced professor in emerald robes as the tall man speaks up, first year's Professor McGonagall, before the professor thanks the man, whose name is Hagrid. Hermione notices the boy who she had shared a boat with dips his head to avoid the professor's gaze. Hermione narrows her eyes as he does before following the crowd inside. When, after a short speech from Professor McGonagall, they were left on their own for a short moment. The boy in the witch's hat leans against the wall with his hands in his pockets, his foot tapping rapidly on the ground as if he was impatient about something but had decided to wait it out. Hermione's eyes narrow at him once more. The boy was up to no good. She was sure of it. "Why are you wearing a witch's hat?" asks a blonde girl with purple eyes to the boy. The boy just smirks before saying, "Because I can pull it off." Before adjusting it a bit, the blonde girl rolls her eyes as a girl next to her, who was wearing a beanie, snorts out a laugh before saying a simple nice. Before Hermione could make her own comment about the odd boy, a yell from the front of the hall catches her attention. "And I said he's not dead." She hears Ron's voice yell out before the snide voice of the roach answers back. "Come off it, Weasley. Is your head as empty as your vaults?" Malfoy says, and a few boys laugh. "Harry Potter is dead. He's been dead. It's more likely that he died that night with his parents when the Dark Lady paid them a visit and Dumbledore was just covering it up." Hermione could easily hear the mocking face in Malfoy's tone of voice. But the name he had said, Harry Potter, she knew. He was mentioned in the rise and fall of the dark arts and history of the Blood War. It was commonly accepted that the boy who lived had ended the war, but Hermione was skeptical of that fact. But none could deny the tragedy that had befallen the poor boy afterward. He had disappeared without a trace, thought to be dead. Hermione turns away from the yelling match back to the boy, but is surprised to find him gone. She turns back and forth looking for him, but finds no trace. And before she can ask the other girls what happened to him, another scream comes from the front, one of fear. She turns and sees something that makes her heart stop. Ghosts, tens of them, floating overhead talking about someone named Peeves before noticing the students and telling them that they hope to see them in their respective houses. But as two approach where Hermione is, they stop before she sees their eyes widen in fear as they begin to look around in fear. "Inictu, do you feel that?" The rodent man in priest robes whispers in fear. "I do. Come, Friar, let's move on," the other ghost says, fear lacing his voice. "But it's 0100 of them," the priest says before the other ghost answers. "If it is, we do not want to be here, so come," Nick the ghost says as he quickly floats away. As much as Hermione wants to ask what they meant by that, Professor McGonagall returns for them. Ordered into a single file line, the group heads off, being led off to through the Great Hall. It wasn't until they were halfway to the stage that the voice of the boy speaks from behind her. "The ghosts were pretty cool, weren't they?" he whispers, and Hermione has to stop herself from jumping out of her skin. "Don't do that," Hermione hisses, but all the boy does is chuckle before they make it up upon a small stage right in front of the high table in front of all the professors. As they line up to face the school, Professor McGonagall places a short stool with an old ratty hat on it. Hermione was confused until it started to sing. Then she was just baffled. The boy next to her chuckles after the hat had stopped singing. "Neat," he says with a smile as he politely claps with everyone else. Hermione leans over close enough to whisper to the boy as Professor McGonagall begins to call out names. "What are you up to?" Hermione demands to know from the boy. He was acting too suspicious to not be up to no good. "Who? Me?" he whispers back. His tone is filled with surprise, but Hermione could see the faint grin on his lips. Nothing at all, he says as the grin morphs into the rogue-like one he had on the boat. Lair, Hermione hisses softly back to him, and the odd boy chuckles just as softly. Okay, fine, I'm just playing a harmless prank, he whispers back, and for the first time since meeting her tilts his head back to look her in the eyes. His striking emerald eyes sparkle with mischief untold that, when matched with his roguish grin, makes her blush. Granger, Hermione! Professor McGonagall calls out. The boy winks at her. Good luck, he says as he tilts his head back down. The weirdest thing about ghosts is how often they're forgotten about. Most mortals, Wixen, demigods, and mundane tend to be happy about forgetting about the dead after a while. They would no longer mourn their loss like they used to, nor would they celebrate the dead's life as they should do. They simply forget. Which the boy found odd, because the dead never forget about the living. They clung to the living via strong feelings of regret, love, or revenge. They want to be seen, but are so often overlooked by the living. Some didn't mind. Like the man standing next to McGonagall, whose eyes are filled with love and patience to wait for her to pass on so they could go together. Some, like the small girl sitting on the arm of the chair of the old man with a long silver beard and wearing magenta robes, just wanted to comfort those left behind, like how she would lean in and whisper into the old man's ear like she was telling him a secret, and the old man would smile just so. Some wanted bloody vengeance, like the writhing mass of souls numbering in the hundreds if not thousands that clung to the woman in the clashing outfit. All the ghosts try to rip and tear at her, trying to punch, kick, pluck out her eyes, or choke her. Only one young-looking female ghost stood apart from the twisting mass of hate, looking on to the woman with an equal measure of pride and horror in the eyes of the female ghost. And some ghosts, the living cling to, like the man with the hook nose being weighed down by ghostly chains that would drag him to his death if he wasn't careful. But the boy paid no mind to the dead, because as long as you paid them no mind, the dead would leave you alone, and that's what the boy needed right now. Not to be invisible, just ignored. So after watching the bushy-headed girl walk over to the stool with the neat singing hat, he digs into himself and feels the cold feeling of death spread through his body as he pulls on his mother's divine domain of the dead and became like the ghosts around him. Ignored by all. Oh, if they had a strong mind, they could see past the ability. But if they didn't, they would just forget he was there when they looked away. And that's just what he needed. So he stood there, tapping his foot as McGonagall went down the list. He was waiting for the P's to pop up. And when they do a set of twins go before him. Patil have heard correctly, but as the last one is sent to the Gryffindor table, the boy prepares himself for his entrance. But the professor pauses at the next name, and with a sad look in her eyes and lips pressed together in a thin line, she checks off the next name without saying it aloud. Did she really just? But as she says Rivers, Oliver, the boy almost loses it. This was better than what he had originally planned for. So with renewed patience, the boy waited. As a rule of thumb, the boy hated being the center of attention. He got enough of that about who his mom was, and he hated it. His original plan was to wait till his name was called and then walk forward as if nothing had happened to him. But one had to roll with the punches when they got hit, so he was perfectly fine waiting it out. Bit bigger than planned, but whatever. So as the last name, Zabini Blaze, was called, the boy dropped the ghost ability. Not that it had worked all that well from the 3 pairs of eyes he felt on him. But as the hat called out Slytherin for Zabini, the boy fought down his grin as he watched Professor McGonagall put the hat on the stool before picking both up and turning to walk his way before stopping as she sees him. The confusion etched on her face was worth all the waiting alone. "Excuse me, ma'am," the boy says as innocent and confused as possible, turning his head toward her. "You didn't call my name," the boy says as the professor openly gapes at him before she side-eyed the old man with the beard. She slowly looks back to the boy in the witch's hat, blocking her view of his eyes, and the professor swallows the lump that had formed in her throat. "And your name, young man?" she asks, as something like a cruel hope begins to blossom in the professor's eyes. The boy walks toward her, taking slow and deliberate steps before stopping, just before tilting his head up to look her in the eyes. Watching her gasp and taking a step back, dropping the stool and hat while placing a hand over her heart as the boy tilts his head and pulls the witch's hat off his head, letting the charcoal gray hair fall free as he smiled up at her. "Harry, ma'am." The boy said, Harry Potter. The reaction wasn't instant. It started small, like all things, whispers at first, but slowly and surely they begin to pick up until it was a cacophony of chaos and sound that defend out all other sounds as the student body begin to almost riot about the reveal. But it ends as quickly as it began. The old guy with the beard stands before lifting his wand in the air, and a sound like a cannon goes off, and the student body quiets down before he turns to Professor McGonagall and speaks. Minerva, he says loud enough for everyone to hear him. It appears that we still have a student to sort, so if you be so kind, before nodding his head slightly. Professor McGonagall finally snaps out of her shock as she looks between Harry and the old guy. Her mouth opens to say something, but closes her mouth before nodding. Of course, Headmaster, she says. Oh, so that's Dumbledore. Harry thinks to himself as he watches as Professor McGonagall sets up the stool again before taking a seat himself, and before the sorting hat covers his eyes. He sees Hermione looking at him with wide eyes. He winks at her before darkness overtakes over vision. A wraith in a rotting body. The boy was alive? No, absolutely not. This was a trick. This had to be a trick. She had killed the boy. She knew she had. It was her last clear memory from that night was the boy falling down dead. But against all logic, the boy was sitting under the hat, getting sorted. No, this was a trick. Dumbledore was pulling something. This was all too convenient to her. This was Dumbledore setting up some figurehead. It had to be. Slytherin, yelled the hat, making the great hall fall into absolute silence as the boy took off the hat and handed it back to McGonagall before thanking her. Before he starts to walk across the stage, every eye in the great hall looking at him. But it was her that he turns to look at. His head tilts while doing so, as if he was inspecting her. So she does the same, tilting her head as she looks at the same emerald eyes that Lily Potter had, the same that the baby in the crib had, and she sees the most damning evidence. He had the scar she had given him, carved with her own magic. She would never forget that scar. And as she looks at the impossible boy looking at her for what felt like hours, he grins at her. And the only one thought that crossed her mind. Impossible. Only I can live forever. Harry Potter. Harry slips into his seat at the end of the Slytherin table, chuckling. Inwardly at the shocked looks on all their faces, he shakes his head. He'd give it a day before he was dragged off to be questioned about where he has been for the past 10 years. And he was going to have fun with it all for as long as he can while trying to learn all this magic stuff. He was dying in 2 months. He should be allowed to have some fun before he kicks the bucket. But as Dumbledore calls the school's attention to begin the feast with a few words, tuck in, Harry had cackled at that. Harry snorts out a laugh. A school full of kids who could use some good fun. A castle full of ghosts and secrets, and a wraith possessing a corpse? Milanoe was wrong, Harry says with a grin as he serves himself some food. This place is going to be anything but boring, he tells himself before taking a bite of his roasted chicken. Chapter over. This was fun to write. So, in case some of you readers are new to my works, welcome. I'm King saxcuL, and welcome to my cringe-ass fanfiction. In this story, we have a rare one, a son of Persephone, and no, it wasn't James knocking up Persephone. If you want inserting shameless self-promotion here, go read the last 2 chapters of my other FIC called A Midsummer Hunt. They have a setup for this, kinda. Anyway, like I said, this is kind of a one-shot, depending if I feel like continuing it later on, because I do want to finish A Midsummer Hunt first. Before y'all ask, yes, Harry would be kind of OP in this, just not with magic. Yes, this is a Harry/female Voldemort story. Sue me, I like it. Yes, I went out of my way to avoid saying Harry's middle name for a reason, as it would spoil some things. Yes, I have his powers thought out. They're kind of busted, but that's what I'm going for, so meh. Did I make Harry a bit too arrogant? I wanted to make him confident, but not arrogant. He knows what he is, he knows what he can do, and he wasn't left at the Dursleys in this one. So I want to make him into this fun-loving kid who loves to pull a few pranks for the shocked looks he would get to see. King saxcuL out. House rules. Wow. This had a reaction. Not a big one, but enough for me to throw y'all a bone and do a quick second chapter. Hope y'all enjoy it. On with the show. Years ago, Los Angeles, California, the underworld, Hades' office. It had started with a meeting at a fair. She had bumped into them by accident. She was only in New York for a few short weeks, researching a few things for her old headmaster, and she had taken a break to explore the fair to rest her mind and turn it off so new. Ideas could come fresh, because one could only put up with flipping through ancient dusty parchment before the mind begins to waver in the search of the esoteric. The knock at his office door surprised Hades, for there were not many who would dare disturb him while he was working. He was a busy god with a busy realm overflowing with the dead, but there was one who could face his wrath without fear. They had hit it off amazingly, talking about everything and nothing. Before they dropped the hint of knowledge about the wider world that she belonged to, she had jokingly asked if they were Wixen, to which they had smiled and said something like that. His love, his wife, his queen, and his world opens the door and walks in, closing it behind her before she looks at him. Her hair almost completely black from the coming spring. Only the roots atop her head were white. She takes a deep breath before looking at him. "We need to talk," Persephone says, her grim and serious tone betraying her beauty. Oh no, Hades thinks to himself. What did she find out? They had dived into the conversation of the esoteric after that, about how one could stop from dying, and they surprisingly were well versed in it. Lily had made a comment about them being a dark Wixen, and they had laughed a deep and terrifyingly beautiful laugh before looking back at her with a smile that sent a jolt of panic down Lily's spine, before telling Lily that they might be with a wink. "There is a problem," Persephone says to her husband for the past 3 millennia. "Okay," Hades says calmly, quickly going through all things that could be a problem. "Is this a me, you, or us problem?" He asks, which set Persephone to pace, which was never a good sign. "I want to say it's a me problem, but I'm pretty sure it's an us problem," his queen says as she paces, and Hades swallows the lump in his throat. The last time she had said that was when she had found out about Maria. She stops pacing and looks him in the eye, before taking a deep breath. I met someone," Persephone admits, sadness in her eyes for the betrayal she had committed, "and we had a night together." She flinches at that. Hades takes a deep breath, before putting down his pen and filing away the paperwork he was working on away in his desk before calmly looking at his wife. "I'm going to rant in rage, but afterwards, we will talk this out and figure out how to fix this. Is that okay?" Hades asks Persephone, before she puts her hands up and nods. "Hey, you do you, if it will make you calmer," she tells him in a soft voice. Right before Hades' desk slams against the opposite wall as the Lord of the Dead begins to yell, curse, scream, and rage in every single language the world hasn't lost, tearing his office apart and causing the city above the underworld to shake from his anger. "And when I get my hands on him, after I'm done extracting his spine through his asshole, I'm tossing his ass in a Tartarus for even daring to even look at you." Hades' yells fill the domain of the dead, but Persephone doesn't even flinch at his rage, because she knows that her husband would never hurt her and mean it. So as he quiets down, breathing heavily through his nose and out through his mouth, Persephone speaks. "It's not a he, dear husband," she says with a coy smile, to Hades' confusion and soon after shock. Lily Evans hadn't once thought of another woman as beautiful since Narcissa Black back in school, but never had she had felt attracted to another woman like she had in that moment. How she had wanted the women to just grab her and ravish her like nothing before with just the woman's smile. She had introduced herself as Corey, and took it upon herself to show Lily around New York. "I'm what?" Hades asks as the shock starts to wear off. "Not a he, it was a she," Persephone admits with a coy smile. Hades' mouth opens and closes a few times before he turns around and picks up his chair and plops down on it, the look of shock never leaving his face as Persephone approaches him with a fearful look before asking, "May I touch you?" Fearing that he would say no, all Hades does is nod dumbly before the queen climbs on her king's lap, sitting, arms wrapped around his neck as his arms wrap around her, cradling her like the most precious thing in the world. "When?" Hades asks. "During spring and summer?" Finally gathering enough brain power to ask a question. That's when I met her," Persephone tells her husband, "and Corey really liked her. Oh, you should see her, beautiful and wild, hair like fire, eyes of emeralds, and she had brains to match her beauty. Dear husband, if Corey wasn't so shy, she would have taken her in the fair that we had met her in." She sighs as she lays her head on his shoulder. "Then when?" Hades asks, wanting to know the timeline of his wife's indiscretion. Persephone sighs again before answering. "The winter solstice," Persephone tells him. "You were off on Olympus, and you know how I get at the height of the winter months," she tells him with a slight smile, and he nods. He had always looked forward to coming home after the meetings, just to be ravished by his wife's insatiable appetite when Persephone was out in full force and sweet little Kore was sleeping deep within her. You weren't here to play with, and I was in a mood, and had the mortal on my mind. The queen of the dead pouts, trailing off. It had been months since she had left New York, and a few weeks since she and James had broken up over a row they had about something stupid. She was missing him, but more deeply, she was missing her. Morals and old beliefs had stopped her from trying anything during the few short weeks she had spent with Kore, and Lily cursed herself for it. So, she was spending Christmas alone in a small cottage she was renting from James. No matter how bad the row was, he still wanted her safe, the silly, loving man he was. She had just found an old ritual to prevent death and give a powerful form of protection over the one who was subject to it. The problem was that it requires a willing sacrifice to invoke it, and no matter how devoted her followers were, she didn't think any of them would give their lives willing to protect Lady Voldemort from death if they could do it for themselves. She had gotten up to get a fresh cuppa from the kitchen when she noticed her, Kore, or someone looking shockingly like her, standing in the hallway, smiling at her. She wore a long, flowing black dress that looked to be made of silk or smoke, gloves that came up to mid-biceps, and what biceps they were, a tiara or crown sat upon her head that looked to be made of ivory dotted with tiny red rubies in the shapes of seeds. Her long hair, once completely back, was now almost completely bone white, except for the tips, which were still black. She looked to be Cleodna come again from the old legends. Kore? Lily had asked in shock, seeing the woman in her home. The woman moans, sending shivers down Lily's spine. Not quite, she whispers before pushing Lily against the wall, and Lily gasped, looking at the unchained, ravishing passion that went so deep into the woman's fathomless black eyes and the promises of the things she, this woman, was going to do to her. Lily's breath hitches in her throat as the woman kisses her, and before the redhead knew it, she was in her bed, writhing in ecstasy from all the things she had imagined Kore doing to her during her most lonely of nights by herself. Is the mortal even alive after spending the night with you? Hades asks, honestly curious if the woman survived. I gave her plenty of little deaths, Persephone says with a sexy smile and a wiggle of her hips. But not the big one, no. Hades sighs out a laugh. My love, my queen, he begins. In all these millennia of being together, you have forgiven me from straying on 8 separate occasions. It would be unfair and hypothetical for me not to forgive you, he tells Persephone before kissing her heads and then her forehead. Even though I was made to miss out on a very sexy time with, from your own words, 2 very beautiful women, he says with a chuckle as Persephone slaps his shoulder. Oh, you, she says softly. Such a pervert. She smiles just as softly at him, just before she grimaces. There is, however, one tiny little obstacle, Persephone admits, biting her bottom lip to Hades' confusion. The Lord of the Dead raises a brow at that, and his queen continues on. You know at the height of pleasure, Kore, it tends to pop out sometimes? She asks, and Hades nods, a confused look still in his eyes. And you know, Kore, all spring and new life, right? Persephone says, and Hades nods again, not quite getting it, but a pit forming in his stomach. Well, let's just say a seed was planted, she says with a grimace, and Hades, lord of the underworld, arguably the most powerful of his brothers, pales in fear. Oh, Hades says, oh no. For Hades knew that the demigod's power depended on how old the god who sired them was. While none of his children would reach the martial prowess that his brother's children would attain, their divine magic was far more powerful, capable of whipping out armies with just a gesture. Hades feared the day when his eldest sister and oldest of the Olympians were to forsake her oath and have a child. The earth would either quake under the heel of fire, or they would bake them all a pie and force them to get along. But a child of his queen was far scarier. For how most mortals thought how he had come to rule the underworld by drawing lots was just that, a myth, because before he was even born there was a ruler of the dead. Before the Greek city-states, before the Olympian myths, there was her. He didn't draw a lot to become the king of the dead. No, he was allowed to become the king by her. The secret maiden, the Kore, dread Persephone, the pre-Mycenaean goddess of the dead. Slytherin common room, Hogwarts. Harry had to admit, He liked the Slytherin common room. It was dark, underground, and cool. You just had to remove all the snake iconography and replace it with skulls, and boom, it would be just like the underworld, or so he read. Right now, it reminded him of the DOA offices, all dark and spooky. Milanoe would love this place. He really needed to talk her into showing up sometime, just to cause a little chaos, he thought to himself. After dinner had ended and Dumbledore had made some start of term announcements, Harry didn't really hear what he had said, too busy looking at the cool ceiling. The prefects, at least that's what he thought they were called, had led all the first years down into the dungeons before stopping before a blank wall and telling them all the password before letting them inside. They were told to line up in front of the fireplace, so their head of house could have a few words with them, but as they stood waiting for whoever, that was Harry's attention span began to sway to this and that. The rest of the house had chosen to sit in the common room on the comfy-looking couches and armchairs. It looked like every single space was taken up except for an armchair by the way back on a small raised platform. It was an ugly-looking thing in the colors of the house. Looked kind of like a throne. Off to the far left from where Harry was standing, it looked to be an entire wall that was taken up by a mirror, which was just weird too. Harry like, why a mirror? Unless it wasn't a mirror? Harry shrugs before he continues looking around. He could feel the eyes of all the Slytherin students on him, watching him like a hawk. Or if he was an interesting specimen, he hated it, but gave them all the benefit of the doubt. He had been missing for like 10 years. Harry was inspecting the ceiling and the silver serpents that coiled and uncoiled as they looked down at them, watching them all and hissing at them. When the hidden door to the common room opened once more, and in walked a giant bat. No, wait, it was a human, not a bat. He walks up to the line of first years, looking each of them in the eye, asking each of them their name before skipping Harry entirely, and begins to pace in front of them as he speaks. Welcome, to each of you, to the noble house of Salazar Slytherin. Look around you, take in the faces of your housemates, for however long you and them are in this house. They will be your family. The man speaks, slow and careful in his words, drawing them out as if to leave them all hanging on for his next word. And like a family, you are expected to support each other in your endeavors, be they in schoolwork or personal projects. We, as a house, stand as one, which means any problems you may have with your housemates stay in the house. Out in the halls you are to stand with your housemates, no matter the cause. Am I understood? The first years all say, yes, sir, before he continues. The man nods. I am Professor Severus Snape. I am the potion master and your head of house. If you are having any problems with either your housemates or other students that you do not think a prefect can handle, my office hours will be posted on the notice board by the entrance. You may come anytime between those hours unless I am with another student. Be warned they are subject to change, but I will try to have any changes posted a day beforehand. Professor Snape says as the first years nod along and follow him as he paces back and forth. Other than the aforementioned rules of unity outside the common room, we have a set of 3 rules here in Slytherin. Know that breaking any of these rules will earn you my displeasure. He says the last word like the thread. It was as he takes a moment to look every single first year in the eyes. And Harry could tell this man was not joking when he said it. The first rule of the house, he snaps, making the first years jump at the sharpness of his tone. But he isn't the one to tell them the rules. It was a tall, blonde girl with a badge pinned to her robes. We are the house of the ambitious, she says, stepping forward with a friendly smile, which should reflect on your grades. You are to do your best in any and all classes, and if your best isn't enough for any given class, you are to seek out someone who can help you, be it another housemate, preferably a prefect or a study group. The second rule of the house, Snape snaps again, and this time a tall, dark-skinned boy speaks with an air of elegance to him. We are the house of resourcefulness, the boy says softly, forgoing a smile for a blank and controlled face, which means if you have resources to help yourself, or better yet, the house, you are to do so. Not doing so is seen as selfishness and a weakness. What we can do as a whole can help the one, and vice versa, but do not let those unworthy of your help try and bully you into it. He does smile before saying, for free, that is. The third and final rule, says a soft voice of a short girl with long brown hair that was braided, is that we are the house of the cunning, which means she trails off with a smile as Snape speaks once again. Don't get caught, Snape says with a nasty smirk that got giggles from all the first years and a mad grin from Harry. He could live with that rule. Snape turns back to the rest of the house before speaking again. The older students should remember how they were helped in their younger years and endeavor to do the same for the students standing in the same place they once stood, Snape says before turning back to the line of first years. The boys' dorm rooms are to your right. The girls are to the left. Your rooms are marked by your year. The girls' side is warded against any male looking to wander in. If a male does cross it, you will find what the ward will do to you as a pleasant dream compared to what I will do to you. Do I make myself clear? Snape says in a tone that promised something nasty if he was tested, and all the boys, Harry included, nod with eyes wide with fear. Good, curfew is at 10 p.m. I expect you all in bed by them. Dismissed, Snape tells them. Potter with me. He snaps at Harry, who raises an eyebrow and watches as the professor turns on his heel and starts walking towards the door to the common room before he quickly follows behind him as the eyes of Slytherin House follow him. They leave the common room and then the dungeons behind completely before Harry speaks. Sir? Where are we going? Harry asks as he has to jog a bit to keep up with the man's long stride. The headmaster's office. Snape answers simply as he continues on, climbing a set of stairs quickly. Oh, Harry says, am I in trouble? He asks, if it's about what happened at the sorting, I think that old lady skipped my name. I didn't mean for her to go down like that. I thought it was rude to interrupt her, you know? Harry says, and technically not lying to the man because he really didn't mean to wait for the last minute. He just rolled with it. That old lady is Professor Minerva McGonagall, Snape informs the boy. She is the Transfiguration Professor, head of Gryffindor House and deputy headmistress, and a woman who you should avoid crossing at all cost. She may have a soft spot for her lions, but she is as swift in correcting misbehaving children as she is stern. That is your only warning, he tells Harry before turning down a hall. But to answer your first question, Potter, no, you are not in trouble. Snape says it like someone was, and he's eager to find out who. So Harry falls quiet and follows the man through the castle at night. The walls were lined with touches and floating candles. From what portraits they passed, Harry could see them moving inside their frames or crossing over into other pictures, which was just sick to Harry, who hadn't seen anything like it before. But before long, their journey through the ancient castle comes to an end as Snape stops in front of a large stone gargoyle. And to Harry's surprise, it moves its head to look down at Snape. Password? It simply asks. Snickerdoodle, Snape says in a flat, unamused tone, before the gargoyle moves aside to reveal a spiral staircase. As Snape begins to ascend the stairs, Harry quickly follows behind him. This magic stuff was getting better and better every minute he was around it. Not even Camp Half-Blood had stuff like this. Hades, not even Olympus had stuff this cool. As they get to the top of the stairs, the sound of a man yelling could be heard from the waiting room. Harry hears Snape sigh like he just got told a shop was all out of black bat-like cloaks, but opens the door before walking inside as Harry hears the same angry voice yell out. And now he's here, great. Harry pokes his head into the arguably cool office he watches. Snape crosses the room and up a small set of stairs to stand by the headmaster, who was sitting behind a large desk full of knickknacks and papers. Snape doesn't answer the angry guy back, just leans down and whispers something into the ear of Dumbledore, who nods and looks at Harry. There are two other men in the room when Harry steps in. One man was wearing a worn muggle thoroughbred suit of brown that had a few patches sewn into the elbows of the jacket. He was standing with his arms crossed while looking at the other man. With a calm but embarrassed face, he had straw blonde that was starting to gray with scars along his face and, in Harry's opinion, a mustache. Why can't you just send Minnie to get him from Gryffindor if you won't let me or Remus go get him? The other man asks. He had his back turned to Harry, so he couldn't see his face as he was leaning over the desk, palms flat on it. His body didn't stop moving as he talked, raising and lowering himself with each word. He wore what looked like heavy riding boots that came up to mid-calf and black denim jeans and a black jacket that looked strangely familiar to Harry. Because, serious, young Harry wasn't sorted into Gryffindor, the headmaster tells the overly emotional man. What? The man, serious, says with a bit of shock. Then where the hell did the hat put him? Harry, finally stepping into the room, was the one who speaks up. I was sorted into Slytherin, he says, and the two men who hadn't seen him quickly turned to him. Sirius had gray eyes, wide with shock, but the man in the muggle suit had only a brow raised over his baby blue eyes. Harry, Sirius says breathlessly, before turning on his heel and charging at him with his arms open. Harry's eyes widen, before he slips under the man's arm and runs across the room with a cry of "Stranger danger!" before circling around the headmaster's desk to hide behind it. The man turns to look at him, hurt in his eyes, and as he steps forward to follow, the other man stops him. "Sirius," the other man says, placing a hand on Sirius' shoulder. "Calm down. Harry doesn't know who we are, remember?" The other man moves towards the headmaster's desk as Sirius deflates at his words, sadness spilling over his face. The man in the muggle suit sticks out his hand and offers it to Harry. "Remus Lupin, allow me to apologize for my overly zealous friend. He didn't mean anything by it," Remus says with a kind smile. Harry slowly takes his hand and shakes it. "Well, it's nice to meet you, Mr. Lupin," Harry tells him, still a bit confused by why these guys were wanting to meet him. Remus chuckles a bit. "Well, Harry, it's more that it's nice to see you again, though I don't expect you to remember either of us," he tells the young boy, who looks at him confused, so Remus explains. "The last time I saw you, you were barely big enough to fit into my arms. By we I mean me and Sirius here, are old friends of your mother and father, and we used to babysit you," Remus says, keeping the kind smile on his face, now tinted with a bit of nostalgia. But Harry was even more confused as his eyes flick back and forth between the two men. "My mother and Fath." He trails off a bit before it hits him. "Oh, you mean Lily and James," he says with a grin. "For a second there I thought you were talking about my mom and stepdad, or well, adoptive parents to you guys. Sorry about that," Harry says as he lets go of Remus' hand, as all the adults in the room look at each other with a dark look. "I'm surprised that you know of your birth parents. Shall we call them?" the headmaster asks. "Oh man, don't even get me started on family trees, headmaster," Harry sighs out. "But only Lily is my birth parent. James was my adoptive dad, though I still think of him as dad because, well, and..." Harry shrugs as if it explains it. And now it was time for all the adults in there to look confused. "Who told you that James wasn't your father?" Sirius asks, eyes narrowed in suspicion. My actual dad," Harry says confused. "Is that who did it?" Sirius asks, his voice raising slightly. "Is that who took you? Who told you that lie?" His voice turns into a protective growl, and Harry takes a step back. "What? No. I mean, kinda. Look, it's complicated," Harry rushes to explain. "Is this what this is about? You guys finding out what happened to me?" he asks, turning to the headmaster, who is looking at him like he was an interesting puzzle. "Yes," Dumbledore admits. "For the most part," he says, leaning back in his chair. "But it is as Sirius says, your father was James Potter, not whoever this other man is." "Okay, listen," Harry says with a sigh, running his hand through his hair, which reminds the men in the room painfully of James Potter. "I've only met my birth dad a few times, and they're pretty cool, but James Potter isn't my birth dad. He did this magic adoption thing to make me like his kid. Even gave me his last name and made me his heir, whatever that means." Harry sighs again, shaking his head. "It was explained to him, but he didn't even get half of it, let alone remember it." "Magical adoption. Do you mean a blood adoption?" Sirius asks, and Harry snaps his fingers and points at him. "That's it," Harry exclaims. "He did that, even asked my birth dad. It was cool, and they said it was all that, and, you know, the fact he died trying to protect me and my birth mom, I think of him as my dad. Because if I don't think of him as my dad after him doing all that, who am I to think of as a dad? You know?" He explains as all the men look at one another. "Then, if James Potter isn't your father," Remus says, "then who is?" asks the headmaster, as Harry grimaces at the question. "That's complicated," Harry admits with the same grimace, looking away from the old man's inquisitive eyes. "Years ago, Godric's Hollow, Lily Evans." "So," Lily says as she places down her cuppa, "you're a goddess?" she asks, sounding skeptical. Says the dark-haired beauty, sitting across from her at the dining room table, sipping her own tea. "And being the goddess of springtime and new life," Lily says slowly, as if she was trying to understand it herself. "This happened when we spent the night together?" Lily asks, gesturing to her swelling belly. "Well, the goddess of springtime is a bit of a misnomer, really, the goddess," Corey explains. "I'm not the goddess of springtime. That's my mother. It's her way of celebrating my return. I'm the goddess of new life, which can honestly be a lot of things," she says with a smile as Lily just looks at her with a look that says how much she could care less about a misnomer. "Sorry," Corey says with an awkward smile. Lily sighs as she presses the palm of her hands into her eyes and rubs them before looking back up to the woman she had spent the night with, she thinks, and somehow got her pregnant, who was pouring herself another cup of tea. But what about? Well, you weren't your, self? When, Lily trails off as a faint blush color her cheeks, and Corey chucks before taking another sip of tea. You mean when I turn your legs to jelly and brain to mush with just my fingers and tongue? Corey asks with a raised brow and a wicked smirk, and Lily's blush deepens as she covers her face with her hands and nods. Well, it's because I wasn't Corey at the time, the goddess says. Lily looks up confused. You see, the name Corey is also a misnomer. Corey isn't a name, it's a title that was given to me a very long time ago. Mortals have forgotten that and mix up the title with the name I use during this time of the year, and the Corey shrugs. It kind of stuck. And since the mortals believe it's so, I'm divided into two goddesses, Corey, the goddess of new life, and the one you met that night, she explains before taking a sip of her tea. And who did I meet that night? Lily asks carefully. Corey bits her lip at that question before narrowing her eyes. Are you sure you want to know that answer? She asks Lily. Would I like to know the name of the woman I slept with and who knocked me up? Lily says, a voice full of anger and sarcasm. No, I'd like to leave it to the paternity test. I like surprises. Yes, I would like to know who did this to me. Lily yells, as Corey pouts and waits for the mortal to calm down. After a few moments of deep breathing from Lily, Corey answers, Persephone, my real name is Persephone, she tells her. Lily stops cold, her eyes slowly widening in fear, and she slowly looks back to Corey. Persephone, as in the queen of the underworld, Persephone? As in the wife of Hades, Persephone? She asks, voice shaking in a bit of fear. As soon as Corey nods, Lily slowly leans back in her seat, her eyes 1,000 miles away. I'm dead, she says. Hades is going to kill me. Her voice comes out as a whisper of horror. Oh, I doubt that, Corey says with a smile. Hades is far more interested in meeting the woman who had caught my attention so thoroughly than smiting her. Lily looks at her in shock, and Corey giggles before adding, why does everyone think is all doom and death? He's honestly the best out of his brothers and loves as deeply as our kingdom sits, Corey says with a soft smile. So if I like something enough to go behind his back, then he takes an interest to make sure it won't hurt me in the end. He's very protective, you see. Oh, is all Lily can say before someone knocks at her front door. And that should be him, in fact, Corey says with a bigger smile. Oh, Lily says as panic starts to settle in her chest as she stands up. Don't worry, dear, he won't do anything. Not while I'm here at the very least, Corey says as she stands as well, picking up the kettle. Why don't you go show him in, and I'll put this back on the stove for some more of this lovely tea. And with another smile, she leaves for the kitchen. Lily slowly makes her way to the front door, swallowing her fear as she unlocks it and opens the front door to what she thought was going to be her death. But standing on the other side of the door was a tall, handsome man with salt and pepper black hair, deep dark eyes, and a clean shave. He wore a fine and fitting black suit with a gray tie with skulls on it. With broad shoulders, he stood over Lily by a good 2 feet. Lily had to tilt her head a bit to look up at him. Lily Evans? He asks in a velvety, smooth voice that reminded Lily of the morning mist in a graveyard that clung to you, or smooth black obsidian. An almost natural husky tone that sends a tingle down her spine and makes her knees a bit weak. Oh, Lily thinks to herself as the impossibly handsome man raises a perfect eyebrow at her, with something glinting in the depths of his eyes. Oh no, this chapter was already half written when I started to write it. All I had to do was add a little Harry to it. And bam, instant chapter for you heathens. How is it half written, I hear? Some of you ask. Ask How Chaos. Not only are they an avid reader, but every time they comment, they give me a good idea. Also, they have a 10 tense pen name. So, what was up with that last part of the chapter? Well, Lily was going through some panic, which is real and hilarious. But to answer a question before anyone asks, yes, Lily was a unicorn for 2 gods of the underworld. And if you don't know what a unicorn is, go ask your parents if they know. Their reactions are going to be picture-worthy. What does that mean for Harry? Don't ask me. I'm just the author, so maybe nothing, possibly maybe, who knows? King saxcuL out. Hoping Mom doesn't find out. After that last chapter of AMH, I need something of a palate cleanser. So back to a happy home life, Harry and the boy who vanished. Welcome back to the third chapter, where we finish the meeting in the office and Professor Twist being Professor Twist. No idea how long this chapter is going to be, but it should be fun. Now, on with the show. Harry Potter, Headmaster's Office. It's complicated, Harry says with a grimace, confusing most of the men in the room. Can you simplify it for us, Harry? Asks the headmaster with a raised brow, and Harry sighs. Not really, Harry says. At least not without permission from my birth dad. It's all types of complicated, and it was explained to me slowly, and I still don't understand it, he says with a shrug as the men in the room look at each other with narrowed eyes. But, hey, if you want the full story, you can ask them when they show up, Harry tells the men. Dumbledore's eyebrows shoot up in surprise. He'll be paying a visit to the school? The old headmaster asks. Yeah, Harry says with a nod of his head. They'll be showing up on the solstice, Christmas, the boy says, quickly correcting his words. Excellent, Dumbledore says with a bit of cheer as the other three men shuffle in place for their own reasons. I look forward to meeting him then, but for now, I think we would all like a few questions answered, Harry, if you don't mind, the headmaster says before pulling out his wand and waving it, making another chair appear in front of his desk. Harry's eyes follow the wand, narrowing at it as he tilts his head just before seeing a chair fold itself into existence. That's so cool, Harry says with a grin as he moves around the headmaster's desk and inspects the new chair. He pokes the padded seat and back, shifts it back and forth, and knocks on the wood all, with a smile on his face and his eyes alight with wonder. He had seen a few gods do the same thing, but for a mortal to do it. Now that was awesome. This magic stuff is going to be fun to learn. Dumbledore chuckles at the boy's reaction. Why, thank you, my dear boy, he tells Harry with a smile and a twinkle in his eye. While not the most impressive thing, it is quite handy, the headmaster says as the boy takes a seat followed by Remus and Sirius. Are you willing to answer some questions, Harry? Albus asks the boy as Harry's eyes jump from one thing to another in his office. The boy looks back at him with a smile. Sure, so long as it's not about my bio dad, because like I said, that's complicated, but we kinda expected this to happen, Harry tells the headmaster to the older man's surprise. Well then, let's start with the biggest question. Albus says, where have you been these last 10 years? The headmaster asks as he leans forward, interlocking his fingers and placing his arms on the desk. Oh, America, Harry says with a smile as three heads all turn to look at a scowling Snape. What? Harry asks, confused. Well, that's embarrassing for you, Snape, Sirius says with a mocking smile. Didn't you go to the States to look and come back empty-handed? Sirius asks. You did? Harry asks, looking at his head of house confused. Where did you look? Still scowling and glaring at Sirius, Snape answers. New York, Massachusetts, the Carolinas, and a few states around New York, and I found not a whisper of you being in any of the magical communities there, he says. Oh, you checked the East Coast. I was over on the West Coast, Los Angeles to be specific, Harry says with a smile, nodding his head. That's not the point, Harry. The point is that he was in the right country and still couldn't find you, Sirius said with a glare at Snape. Do you know just how big the states are? Harry asked Sirius. Like the whole of England can fit into one state, and that's not even the biggest state. Kinda unfair to say that, he says as Sirius looks at him with a hurt look on his face as Snape smiles at Sirius viciously. But I've been living in California, but I spend summers in Long Island. New York, there's a summer camp that I go to there, Harry says with a smile to the headmaster. And who has been taking care of you all this time, if not your mysterious birth father? Albus asks. You've mentioned them before. The headmaster says, inspecting the boy. He seemed happy, healthy, and whole, but Albus knows that first impressions don't normally sum up everyone you meet. Their names are Corey and Aminthes, my adopted mom and stepdad, Harry informs them, the smile never wavering as he kicks his feet back and forth. They're awesome. Aminthes runs a big record company in L.A. called DOA Records. DOA? Remus asks, being a half-blood himself. He knew Muggle Entertainment, but he never heard of DOA Records. Then again, he didn't pay a lot of attention to it. Dead on arrival, Harry says, looking at Remus with a huge grin, as if there was a joke in it that none of the men got. And they've been good? To you? Sirius asks, eyeing Harry with a bit of concern, and Harry looks at him, a bit confused. Well, yeah. Why would they adopt me if they weren't going to be good to me? Harry asks. I mean, Mom can be scary at times, and Aminthes has a temper, but he never takes it out on us. Only his office, Harry says with a shrug. Us? The headmaster asks, a brow raising with the question. Oh, they have kids of their own, but we all treat each other like brothers and sisters. I have two older sisters and a younger brother, Harry says, turning to the headmaster while tapping a rhythm on his thighs with his hands. Technically, Nico was older than him, but they were in the Lotus Hotel and Casino frozen in time, so it didn't count, but these guys didn't need to know that. And how did you come to Hogwarts? The headmaster asks as he leans back in his chair. Well, I got a letter saying I was accepted here in my Ilvermorny. Letter. Mom wanted me to go to Ilvermorny because it was closer, but I knew Lily and James went here, and I kind of wanted to follow in their footsteps, Harry says with a shrug with a somewhat sad look coming over his face. I never knew them, and I wanted to honor them in some way. This was the best way I could think of, so we wrote back saying I would be attending, went to the alley place, and got all my school stuff before staying in Nomage, London for a few weeks, he says. Though most of that wasn't true, Maloney swiped his letter from the castle, and they never wrote to anyone telling them he was coming. But with international mail, you never know what could happen. So Harry watches the old headmaster tap his fingers on the arm of his chair, looking at him. Harry prayed to Hermes his fast talk wouldn't be questioned. Why were you not raised by your, birth father? Remus asks before Albus could continue with his own line of questions, and Harry turns back to the man. Like I said, it's complicated. They're real busy most of the time, so they asked their sister to raise me, and Corey agreed. Harry tells the man, and Remus frowns but leans back, looking over to the headmaster, catching his eye. Something to the men wasn't adding up. So, they told you everything? Albus asks, and Harry nods. They never lied to me or left anything they knew was important out, Harry says with a shrug. Even the fact they kidnapped you? Sirius asks in a grim tone, looking at the boy, causing Harry's head to snap to him. I wasn't kidnapped, Harry defends, but looking into the grim face of Sirius, he could tell the man thought differently before turning to the headmaster, who had the same look on his face. I wasn't, Harry says, leaning forward, gripping the arms of the chair. My dear boy, the headmaster starts with a sigh. I'm afraid that is, in fact, what happened. You were to go somewhere else. Your aunt and uncles for a short while before Sirius here could safely claim you in the aftermath of the war with Lady Voldemort. As the headmaster says the name, most of the men in the room flinched at the sound of it, small ones, but they were still there. I was left on a doorstep, headmaster, that's child abandonment. I was lucky my birth dad picked me up and left with me. You have no idea what could have happened to me if they hadn't, Harry argues back. He's been told this story by Corey. He knew where she had found him. You would have been protected, Harry, Remus says softly. What that man did was kidnapping. He had no legal custody of you, no right to take you, but he did, he tells the boy. You don't know that. None of you do, Harry yells after turning to Remus. It doesn't change the fact that what he did was illegal. Harry, Dumbledore says, it will be seen as kidnapping here in the Wixen Islands, and why I do hate to be the bearer of bad news. You will not be returning to America after the school year is over. We will be pushing for you to be placed with who you should have been with these last 10 years, the headmaster says in a stern voice, and Harry narrows his eyes at him. Headmaster, I don't think you realize just how much of a bad idea that is, Harry says very calmly, but on the inside, he was freaking out a bit. He really wanted to come to Hogwarts, as Lily and James did, but he knew for a fact that if Corey had one excuse, she'd pull him from the school in a heartbeat. And that's not even touching what Persephone would do if anyone thought they could just take Harry from her. Corey was scary, but Persephone was another level of fear that not even Hades would cross when she was in a bad mood. Then please, Harry, explain it to me, Dumbledore says to the boy, looking him in the eye, seeing the anxiety building in the boy. Harry hops off his seat before pulling out his shrunken trunk and placing it on the ground before enlarging it back to its normal size and opening it. He doesn't dig in the trunk itself, but pouches that line the underside of the lid. As three of the adults in the room were watching the boy with interest, something else caught Sirius' attention, a black leather jacket. As Harry keeps digging into pouches, cursing under his breath, Sirius gets up from his seat and walks over to the trunk before leaning down, brushing his fingers against the old leather jacket. You kept it, he says breathlessly before Harry turns to him with a confused look on his face before sees what Sirius was touching. Oi! Harry yells before slapping Sirius' hand away from his jacket. Pause to yourself, buddy. You've got your own jacket, he tells the man, anger in his voice, as he looks at Sirius with a glare. Sirius just chuckles. I know I have one. They came in a set after all, Sirius tells the young boy, Harry's eyes narrowing at him. You don't know, do you? He asks Harry, much to the boy's confusion. No what? Harry asks, curious about it all. It had started when the man saw his jacket, the jacket that his mother had found him. Wrapped in on the front steps of the porch she found him on. She had no clue who had done it or why. When a Wixen child is born, it's an old tradition of the noble houses to name Cumwar, or godparents to the child, Sirius explains. They're chosen from family or close friends that are like family. Each parent chooses the godparent of the opposite sex. The father chooses a female, and the mother chooses a male. Lily chose me to be your Cumwar, he says with a smile and a shake of his head as Harry was looking at him with wide eyes. Shocked the hell out of me when she did. I can think of no better guard dog than you. Sirius, she told me. He tells the boy in front of him who was looking at him in a shock as Sirius' face turns in a sad and mournful look as he continues. I was the first to arrive on the scene after what happened. I pulled you out of the crib, and you were bloody freezing, and I didn't want you to catch a cold. So I did the only thing I could think of, and I wrapped you up in my jacket, Sirius says with a sigh as he picks up the old leather from the trunk, turning it over in his hands with a sad smile before pulling out his wand. Your mother, Lily, had sewn runes inside the hem of it. So no matter the weather, I would always be able to wear it, Sirius says in a soft whisper, before drawing his wand across the hem of the jacket and pulling back the lining to reveal runes threaded in gold on the inside before showing them to Harry. Harry swallows before taking the jacket, running his fingers over the runes before turning back to Sirius. Can you Harry is able to get out, gesturing to the split hem, because he didn't expect this. He had always thought it was James' jacket that he had somehow gotten a hold of, not the man standing in front of him. All right, sorry, Sirius says as he waves his wand over the split hem, repairing it. Just wanted to show you to prove to you, I guess, Sirius says, rubbing the back of his head. No, it's cool, Harry says awkwardly, before putting the jacket back into the trunk, pushing it from his mind as he goes back to digging through the pouches. When you disappeared, Sirius begins again, watching Harry stop looking for whatever he was looking for a second. His emerald green eyes flicked to Sirius to show him he was listening as he was digging. I turned the islands upside down looking for you. When I couldn't find you, I put a reward out for your safe return. It's never been claimed, and I felt like I had failed them, Lily and James. I wasn't the guard dog that she thought I was, he says sadly before Harry exclaims in victory, pulling out a bundle of papers before turning to Sirius. Harry opens his mouth before closing it a few times, pressing his lips together and furrowing his brow, so much like Lily's that it almost hurts as three men look upon the missing child finally found. I'm sorry, Harry finally says. My birth dad didn't know. They thought there was no one else, or they would have contacted you. I swear they would have. We always thought the jacket belonged to James, Harry says in a whisper looking at Sirius' feet. Sirius reaches out, putting both hands on his shoulders and kneeling down to eye level with the boy, and Harry looks at him in the eyes. Listen, kiddo, I don't blame you. You didn't have a choice in the matter. I blame the man who took you off that porch, Sirius tells him. I have a few choice words for him and maybe a few curses, but you're back now. That's all that matters, if you'd like, because I know I would. To get to know each other, I'm here for it. I have 10 years to make up to you, kiddo. Starting now if you want, Sirius says with such honesty and emotion that Harry can't help but to tear up a bit. He already thinks that Corey is going to love this guy. Like her, Sirius wore his heart on his sleeve and refused to apologize for it. Will you tell me about them? Harry asks Sirius. Of course, kiddo, Sirius says with a lopsided grin. And Harry smiles back at Sirius before the boy does an unexpected thing and launches himself at Sirius and wrapping his arms around his neck, hugging him. From his reaction earlier, Sirius didn't think Harry would do this, but doesn't miss the opportunity to wrap his arms around the boy and hugs him close as Remus looks on with a soft smile. After a moment or two, a small cough could be heard from the headmaster, to which Sirius answers, "Shut the fuck up, Albus. I've waited 10 years for this. You can wait 2 minutes," he says to the scoff of Snape and the chuckle from Remus. The headmaster chuckles himself. "I suppose I can. I just wish to remind you that curfew is soon, Sirius," Albus says, and the two break from their embrace. He is right, it's getting late, and I'd rather get this over with now, so I can get some sleep for class tomorrow, Harry tells Sirius, and the man nods, retaking his seat as Harry re-shrinks his trunk before, walking up to the headmaster's desk and handing the man the large bundle of paperwork. Dumbledore takes the paperwork with a curious look on his face before opening it and begins reading it as Harry explains. It's all legal, all official, signed, stamped, and dated by both the mundane and magical government in America. My legal guardian is Corey Despoina, Harry tells the headmaster. She's been taking care of me ever since March of '82. She sees me as one of her kids. If you try to force the issue, not only is she going to push back, but she will pull me from Hogwarts. And I really want to come here, Harry says with a sigh as he runs a hand through his hair. Besides, if Corey gets involved, that means my stepdad will. And that is one guy you do not want to cross. And that's not even mentioning my birth dad, because if they get involved, they'll turn the islands upside down and start shaking till I come out. Harry says, meaning every word, because Hades would get involved if Corey gets upset, and that would be very bad for everyone involved in it. He didn't stand around and do nothing when someone causes his wife distress. He normally started nuking people and did not care about collateral damage in the process. And if they kept at it until Persephone was fully awake, well, what Harry said wasn't an exaggeration. Harry waits as the old headmaster scans each page of the documents he had handed him. Once done with one, he would lay it face down on the desk to read through the next as Harry stood and fidgeted and shuffled his feet. Halfway through, Dumbledore sets the rest of the paperwork down before rubbing his eyes and sighing. Harry, the headmaster says, the paperwork, while in order, does not take into account that you were kidnapped, he says as he turns to look at the boy in question. And before he can get another word out, Harry cuts him off. Fine, whatever, best kidnapping ever, Harry says, throwing his hands in the air. But what does it matter? They didn't hurt me, they didn't starve me, they sent me to school, they tucked me in at night, they sent me to a summer camp on the other side of the country because I like it there. Harry yells before turning to Sirius. I'm sorry you didn't know, but my birth dad didn't know I had a godparent or they would have contacted you, but they're not bad people. They love me and I love them back. So what does it matter if I was kidnapped? I'm here now. They let me come here knowing this was going to happen, and they still let me come Hades. My stepdad even paid for all my school stuff without batting an eye. Just talk to them, please, Harry says, desperation crawling into his voice as he looked back and forth between Dumbledore and Sirius, trying to make them understand, hoping they would so none of the gods of the underworld show up to tear the school apart, because no one, not Harry, not Hades, not Corey, wanted to see what would happen if Persephone woke up in a bad mood. Because the Queen of the Dead did not take disrespect lightly. Slytherin Common Room. The meeting had run late, with the adults undecided on what to do at the time. Dumbledore had wanted to move forward with a meeting, with some wising thing to get custody turned over to Sirius. But the other man had listened to Harry and told Dumbledore to hold off on it as much as possible and asked Harry if he could set up a meeting. With Corey, he wanted to meet her and see if they could come to some agreement between the two before the courts got involved. Harry was relieved when the older man told him this and promised to write to Corey first thing in the morning, lying a bit by telling them she was still in London for a few more days just in case. With that, Snape, who had not said a word through most of the conversation, had escorted him back to the Slytherin Common Room just a few minutes before curfew. No last words, no comments, nothing from the man. He was like a brick wall. All he did after getting Harry to the secret entrance was turn on his heel and leave him there. Harry had just shrugged before turning to the entrance and realizing he didn't remember the password. Looking up and down the corridor to make sure he was alone, he places his hand on the entrance before closing his eyes and taking a deep breath. He could see them, little flickers of the light of life behind his closed eyes. All deep in the dungeons that they slept in, there were still a few souls in the common room, and hopefully, they wouldn't see what Harry was about to do. Taking another deep breath, Harry draws on the domain of the dead. His charcoal gray hair begins to fade to a grayish-white before, much like a ghost. He slips through the solid stone as if it was air. He pokes his head through first to check to see if anyone was watching the entrance. Luckily, no one was, so he slips the rest of the way through. On the other side of the entrance, he lets out his held breath. It comes out as a white mist like on a cold winter day as his hair fades back to its normal color for him. Harry idly rubs his chest as he walks through the common room, avoiding the attention of the few older students that were hanging out in it, willing his heart to start beating faster again. The one downside of Persephone's domains was one has to be close to death to use them to great effect, but ghost form was far too useful and outweighed the consequences of calling upon it. But still, Harry much preferred Corey's domains over Persephone's. Not that he'd ever tell either of them that. Harry walks down the corridor that leads into the boys' dorms, and true to Snape's word, one door holds a small plaque with Year I hanging on the door, so shrugging he turns the handle and pushes the door open. The room was large and well lit by torches and candles. It was more of a hall with 6 four-poster beds lining the walls, 3 on either side, with small writing desks and plush high-backed chairs to one side of each bed. Dark stone walls led up to a low-hanging ceiling. There was a door to the far back that possibly led to a bathroom that all the boys would share. Other than dark stone and stained wood, everything else was in the house colors of green and silver, which was fine with Harry. They were nice colors, but he would prefer maybe some blues, reds, and white thrown in to give it a bit more color. But he wasn't a decorator of any kind, so all he could do was shrug and walk over to the only need that didn't have a trunk in front of it. The other boys in the room had stopped what they were doing to look over at him as he walked in and looked around with a smile on his face. 3 of them had dragged the chairs by their beds to the middle of the room and were talking in quiet voices. One was on his bed, writing what looks to be a letter, and the 5th boy was laying in bed reading a book. The blonde boy with the 2 large boys stopped talking as soon as he walked in. The boy writing the letter looked up at him, and the other dark-skinned boy looked over at him before turning back to his book with disinterest. Harry digs into his pocket and pulls out his trunk before placing it on the ground and enlarging it before he starts to dig through it for his pajamas, and continues to do so when the blonde boy begins to talk to him. "So, you're him," the blonde boy says. "You're Harry Potter." He says this is a statement and not a question. Harry, not looking up, answers him. "That's what it says on the birth certificate," he says before digging in another part of his trunk. He knows he packed them, so where the hell are they? And surprisingly not dead from the crazy dark witch, he says with a smirk as the blonde boy blushes. The blonde boy stands, straightening his robes before walking over to Harry, and the 2 other boys stand to follow. He reaches Harry as he exclaims in victory and pulls out his pajamas, and turns to the blonde boy. "Malfoy." The blonde boy introduces himself, tilting his head back and standing straighter, trying to make himself look taller. "Draco Malfoy. You'll find that some families are better to know than others. I think I could help you with that," he tells Harry, and Harry looks down to his hand with a raised brow, before looking back to the boy. "Don't know about that last part, but it's nice to meet you, Draco." "I'm Harry," Harry says with a smile as he takes the boy's hand and shakes it. Draco smiles politely back before introducing him to Crabbe and Goyle, before turning and pointing out the boy writing the letter and introducing him as Theodore Nott, and the boy reading the book as Blacy Zambini, both who nod politely at Harry, and he waves back at both of them with a smile. He excuses himself to change into his pajamas before crawling into bed for the night. He couldn't wait to get started with classes in the morning, but first he pulls out a small black journal and begins to write down everything that had happened today, like the fact he had a godfather. So when his 2 months are up, there would be a record. He would write Corey in the morning about Sirius. When he was done, he tucks away the book under his pillow and closes his eyes with a smile. Hogwarts Courtyard. Harry Potter's last few days have been interesting, to say the least. Between his first Transfiguration class, where he saw Professor McGonagall transform from a cat on a desk to a human and scolded a late student, to the tiny charms professor whose introduction to his class was teaching them all the color-changing charm, and had them battling it out in class before, with a swipe of his wand, had cleaned a room that looked like a rainbow exploded in it, and put everything back into its place with a smile before doing a lecture on his subject. Professor Snape was the least fun, but boy did the guy know how to command his class with a few interesting questions and a small speech. He had set them to work with a word of warning about fooling around in class. One student didn't take the warning seriously enough, and his cauldron exploded, and Snape was mad. Herbology was possibly one of, if not his favorite classes. It was all about magical plants and what they could be and how they were used. Harry didn't have the power to control plants like the children of his grandmother Demeter, but they did bloom and grow faster with him around. And boy did magical plants grow wild. The screaming shrooms and shrivel fig were twice their sizes when Harry got done handing them. It was so cool. The other classes were great as well, a bit boring but just as cool. The best thing was finding out a ghost was teaching history. When Professor Binns looked at him, Harry had thought he would flee, much like the castle poltergeist did when it ran across Harry. But this ghost had more nerve than most and just bowed his head respectfully to him before continuing on with his lesson. But then there was defense against the dark arts, and the ever-enigmatic professor of the class, the school's very own wraith in a rotting body, Professor Olivia Twist. The woman was a complete mystery to Harry, with a personality that was as clashing as the clothes she wore. One minute she would be a strict taskmaster expecting obedience from the class. The next she was this goofy teacher who would poke fun at anyone she saw fit in that moment. To someone whose breadth and depth of the magical arts border on genius from what Harry could decipher from the small tangents she would go off on when explaining something. The thing Harry didn't like about her is how often she would call on him in class, from simple questions to things Harry had no idea what she was talking about, to her using him as target practice with some of the more basic spells they were learning, such as the knockback jinxes. She really liked using that on him. She would needle him and set up almost impossible tasks for Harry to do in class. But Harry was a demigod and was trained to overcome whatever obstacle was set in front of him. When he would succeed, she would smile at him, but it would always put him on edge. There was an unspeakable malice to it that none of his classmates saw. But then again, none of his classmates had faced down a Cyclops before. It was like she wanted to eat him or something. He had made a few friends while here, but oddly enough none from Slytherin. Hermione was one of them. Harry had taken the chance to sit with her during their first Transfiguration class, but he had forgotten her name, but she took no offense to it and reminded him of it. She had called him out of his little prank, which got Harry laughing and her demeanor cracking a little as she smiled and shook her head when he explained what had happened and how didn't expect for Professor McGonagall to skip his name. They got on pretty well with their shared excitement over learning magic, actual magic. In an old castle, she had made a joke about it being like something out of a myth that got Harry to giggle. Draco had tried to tell him to stay away from her because she was of lesser blood or something stupid like that. Harry had told him that he didn't know or care about what he was talking about. Draco had gotten all red face and stormed away from him in the common room, where some students spent the night scowling at him for what he had said, but most had left him alone. Then there was the pair of twins that he had met while exploring the old castle. Fred and George Weasley. Harry couldn't tell them apart to save his life. Even their souls were the same, which was just awesome. Much like Harry, they had a love for harmless pranks, and Harry had eagerly joined them in setting up a few. So far, they had charmed a doorway to change the color of the robes of anyone who walks through it into bright pinks and purples, charmed random chairs in all the classes and Great Hall to make loud farting noises. When someone sat down in them, they also somehow found their way into the kitchen to charm some of the goblets to cause uncontrollable yodeling for a full minute after someone drank from it. They even got the headmaster with that one, who got a good laugh out of it as well. They weren't the only twins Harry had noticed. There was another set in Slytherin that would watch him when they thought he wasn't paying attention. They were a year or two older than him. The Caro twins, Hestia and Flora. But so far all they've done is watch him, which granted was a bit creepy, but harmless. Harry had written all of this down in his journal and to Corey along, with Sirius wanting to meet her. Sirius had written to him, once asking how he was settling in, sharing little stories about James and Lily that made Harry laugh and smile. He had also written him a letter, but was going to send that with a school owl. He didn't want to scare the man with his own owl, because Harry's owl was a little unique. Which is why Harry found himself alone during dinner out in the courtyard, just under the astronomy tower. Fewer witnesses to see him call her. Holding out his arm at chest level, Harry reaches into himself as he closes his eyes, holding his breath as his hair rapidly turns to white before he whispers to the cold winds of the Scottish Highlands. "Come to me, Eurydice." It starts with a flicker of white just above his arm, before a white haze of mist begins to twist and turn around his arm, before coalescing in white wings and luminous yellow eyes as Harry feels the ice-cold grip of her talons on his arm. Harry opens his eyes and smiles softly at her as she hoots softly to him, turning her head to him as Harry's hair fades back to the charcoal gray color his hair normally was. "Hey girl," Harry says as he scratches under her chin as she coos softly at his touch. "Here, I need you to take this to Corey, okay?" Harry tells her as he pulls out the rolled-up letter. Eurydice bobs her head in understanding before grasping the letter in her ghostly talons before stretching her wings and taking off. Harry watches her fly straight into the air. Before tucking her wings and dropping from the sky, she plummets toward the ground before she hits the stone of the courtyard and slips through to the underworld. Harry smiles as she does before shaking his head. What a show-off. Harry stands there, enjoying the cold wind of the changing seasons with a small smile and closed eyes. Persephone will be awake soon, and Harry can't help but to wonder if he'll be alive when she raises from her slumber deep inside of Corey. It's happened before, only a few times, and he'd love to see his mom again before he ships off for the big sleep. But his thoughts were interrupted by the voice of a professor he didn't know if he liked or hated. "Mr. Potter, whatever are you doing out here?" The thick New York accent gave away who it was immediately. "You do know dinner is going on right now, correct?" Professor Twist says as the click, click, click of her polished shoes echo throughout the courtyard. Harry turns around with a smile on his face. "Hey, Professor Twist. I was just sending off a letter. I was about to head down to dinner now," Harry says, the smile never leaving his face. Professor Twist makes a show of scanning the skyline before turning back to him with a raised eyebrow. "I'm sure you were, Mr. Potter, and certainly not up to any mischief at all, she says, looking at him, her eyes drifting up to his bangs that hid his famous scar. "Why, Professor, I haven't caused any mischief," Harry says, pausing for a moment before saying that you can prove, which causes the professor to smirk down at him. "Why, Mr. Potter? You assume I need evidence of you causing mischief to punish you for mischief," Professor Twist says, turning her head slightly, keeping the smirk on her face, almost matching Harry's smile. For a moment, Harry thought the odd professor was going to give him detention just to prove her point, but all she does is jerk her head and say, "Come along, Mr. Potter. I'll walk you to the Great Hall just to make sure," before she turns on the spot, hands in her pocket, walking away from Harry. Harry jogs to catch up to the professor, not wanting to get in any trouble. Yet, for disobeying a teacher, when he finally catches up with her, Professor Twist had her passive, grumpy look on. The one she wore when the class was reading from their books and she was grading at her desk, or looking out the window, or looking at him. "So," Harry begins with, "how's your day been, Professor Twist?" He asks with a bright smile. "Benignly boring," she answered in a flat tone that sounded like it was a truth of her life she couldn't escape. "Oh, that sucks," Harry says, before they fall into an awkward quiet as they walk through the school. Before long, Harry speaks up again. "Why was it so boring?" he asks. "Because outside of teaching first years, what end of a wand points? What way? All my other years are revising what we had covered at the end of last year," Professor Twist says, "which reminds me, where did you get your training from?" she asks, looking down at Harry with a raised brow. "My training?" Harry asks back, looking confused, but freaking out a bit on the inside. Did she know something about Camp Half-Blood? She was from New York, and he knew the magical and divine worlds mixed a little bit at the edges, but didn't know how much. "You have excellent wand control," Twist says as she pulls her hand from her pocket and moves her wrist around to show what she means. "Someone must have taught you that. I was wondering if I knew who," she says. "Oh," Harry exclaims, understanding what she was getting at. "It wasn't anything magical. My mom wanted me to learn self-defense, so I could fight back if anyone tried something," Harry says with a smile. "Self-defense?" Professor Twist asks, hoping the boy would elaborate, and he does. "I know karate," Harry says before making quick chopping motions with his hands and throwing an awkward kick with a hiya. Thrown in, Olivia couldn't help it. She started laughing at the child flailing awkwardly beside her. Professor Twist shakes her head as she continues to walk down the corridor, heading to the grand staircase. "Hey, I got you to laugh, and here I thought you hated me," Harry says as he catches up with her after his awesome high kick. Professor Twist turns her head to Harry. "You think I hate you?" she asks with an amused look on her face. "Well, yeah," Harry says like it was obvious. "What with picking on me in class and following me around to hopefully catch me doing mischief," he tells her, the smile never leaving his face. Twist rolls her eyes and sighs. "I don't pick on you in class, Mr. Potter. She trails off as if looking for the right words. "Want to see what the big deal is about you that everyone makes. And I must say, you've been exceeding all my expectations thus far," she tells him with a nod. "And the following me around bit?" Harry asks with a cheeky smile. "I'm not following you around, Mr. Potter," Professor Twist says, rolling her eyes again. "This is the first time we've met outside of class." "Who do you think I am, Snape?" she says with a scoff. "Snape follows people around?" Harry asks. "Like a lost puppy or a giant bat. Can never tell which," Twist says with a shrug and a grin as Harry starts to laugh. "Hey, I thought he looked like a giant bat too, especially with that huge cloak he wears." Harry says with a grin as they finally make it to the Great Hall. But it's good to know you don't hate me, I guess. Harry admits as he stops to look up at Professor Twist, as she too stops to look back at the boy. Well, here's a little spoiler for you, Mr. Potter. It's not that I hate you, the professor in clashing colors says. It's that I hate everyone equally, before a cruel smirk blooms on her face. Harry says as he squints at her, thinking for a moment. I don't believe that, he says after a moment, making Olivia raise a brow in question at the boy. Oh, and why is that? She asks. Harry just shrugs and says, because we all have to like someone, if not, life wouldn't be worth living. Can you imagine living forever, without anyone to care about? Harry says with a smile before thanking her, and running off to the Gryffindor table to eat with Hermione, like he said he would earlier in the day. A rotting body walking around. Cheeky little shit was the thought on Lady Voldemort's mind as she relaxes in a hot bath after dinner. She had used the excuse of the curse that had once ravaged the body of the former Olivia Twist to get out of her patrols that night, dumping it on the great black bat that was Severus Snape. The fucker deserved it, and much more for daring to touch her as she sat down at the high table. Stay away from my Slytherins, Twist. He had hissed in her ear after grabbing her shoulder. She lays back in the hot, soapy water, in one hand Olivia's wand, and a glass of fire whiskey in the other. It was the cheaper stuff, but right now she just wants some to wash down the taste of the unicorn blood potion she had just taken. She shifts in the tube and hisses in pain, and looks down before waving the wand in her hand to clear the bubbles. The black necrotic flesh had crawled up another inch or so. It started about a month or two after subsiding what was left of Olivia Twist's broken soul. A small sore black spot near her hips, and had grown over the last year to cover most of her hips and upper thighs, which was just a shame. Olivia had a great body, and Voldemort was hoping to at least get laid before the rot spread too far, but that was off the table now. Soon the rot would spread up to her torso, and that was going to suck, which means no more eating food or getting slosh for the pain. She'd probably going to have to remove her internal organs as well, which is a whole other type of pain to do. But that was later. Now her mind was working out the problem that was getting to the Philosopher's Stone. She could easily undo her protections on it. A curse disguised as a ward that was disguised as a simple logic puzzle of two doors. She had told the old goat one door kills while the other lets him through, but in truth, both were cursed to wither the body. So long as the other teacher's defenses weren't designed to waste her time as much as possible, she should be able to snatch the stone and leave quickly. But she would have to poke around soon and find out. There was also the other problem of not knowing what the goat was going to set up. Knowing him, it was going stupidly complex, but with a simple solution. Dumbledore wasn't hailed for his mind for no reason. The man had an infuriating ability to think so far outside of the box that the box wasn't even in view. Then there was the boy. She still wasn't sure if the boy was actually Harry Potter or another one of Dumbledore's schemes. Whoever the brat was, he was interesting at least. Every challenge in class he had met and surpassed her expectations of him. Didn't matter what she had set up, multiple moving targets, bouncing cantrips off the floor, hitting 3 targets with one spell, knocking back heavier items over longer distances than the other students. Then there was that neat little trick with the owl and his hair. She still couldn't figure out how he did that one. Unless the boy was a necromancer, she laughs at that thought and dismisses it immediately. The last necromancer on the Wixen Islands died over 500 years ago, and the Potter bloodline shared nothing in common with that man. So, the body of Olivia Twist knocks back the glass of fire whiskey and pours another glass before tapping her wand against the tub, reheating the water and sinking deeper into the hot, soapy water. It really was the simple things in life. Because we all have to like someone, if not, life wouldn't be worth living. Can you imagine living forever without anyone to care about? She scoffs again. Cheeky little shit, she says out loud to no one but to the raising steam and her cheap whiskey. He didn't get it. And after she gets her body back, he won't live long enough to learn it was lonely at the top, because the top was upon the mountain of corpus that you had to pile up to get there. And that's where she stood, at top, as a god among mortals and the common rabble of the world she wanted to burn. One way or another, Harry Potter or not, she was going to kill the brat and show him that life was only worth living alone. Fuck, I love Twist and her unapologetic hatred for every other living being in the world. While Canon Voldemort just wanted power, my Voldemort just wants everyone else dead because she hates everyone, and the scary thing is, she has the power to do it and she knows it. But explanation time. In this chapter, we got another taste of Harry's demigod abilities. Let's go by the order they appear in, shall we? Ghost form. A part of the divine domain of the dead. When Harry uses this ability, he becomes like a ghost and everything that it entails. The downside is the longer he stays in it, the closer to becoming a ghost he gets, and that means he dies. He can stay in it for about 30 seconds before he has to drop or risk that happening. Necromancy. This one is self-explanatory. Being a child of Persephone, he has control over the dead, and he can summon them, command them, send them to the underworld, etc., etc. How does Hades feel about Harry? He likes him. He doesn't love him like he does his own children, but he likes him well enough. In this DOA is an actual recording studio that's run by a bunch of dead businessmen that sign on now and upcoming artists because why not? Eurydice is Hedwig in this. Why the name change? Simple. Because Harry isn't an orphan in this. He named her after a myth his mother played a central role in. Eurydice is also a gift from Melion, who we will be meeting in the next chapter. I don't remember if that's everything, but that will do for now. Next time on The Boy Who Vanished, Corey meets Sirius. Winter arrives early for Hogwarts. Melion puts on a show, and Harry Potter dies. King saxcuL. Mom found out, run. I already have this chapter, for the most part, thought out, so I'll be updating it first. Before we begin, I have to start by saying that in this chapter, Dumbledore is going to kind of be, this is not bashing. I love Dumbledore's character in the books, his motives, and his actions when seen from his point of view. But he'll be acting like it in this chapter for good reasons that I'll try to explain. And before anyone starts on how Corey acts in this, she knows Corey is this goddess who loves and cares deeply, and she is trying to convince them not for their sake or her own. She's doing it for Harry. Please do try and keep this in mind before you fill the comments with, but she's a goddess. Understand? Good. On with the show. Excerpt from the Daily Prophet, September 3rd, 1991. The Boy Who Lies? By Rita Skeeter. Let it be known that you've heard it here first, folks. That Harry Potter, known to the Wixen Islands as the boy who lived, is alive. For the last 10 years, the fate of Harry Potter was unknown when he had disappeared from his Muggle aunt and uncle's home between the months of November and December of 1981. Most had written the boy off as dead after 7 years of searching for him. But as of September 1st, Harry Potter has returned to the Wixen Islands, reappearing at Hogwarts for enrollment during the sorting of the class of 91. Being sorted into Slytherin, the house that gave us the darkest witch in the last half-century, if not all time. What does this say about our beloved boy who lived? Are the age-old rumors about the former Dark Lady's fear of the boy true? Is Harry Potter the next Dark Wizard? Or does he just have cunning in spades? These and many other questions are being asked by many, but the headmaster of Hogwarts, Albus Dumbledore, has refused to comment on any current student of Hogwarts, and Harry Potter's godfather, Sirius Black, has also had no comment other than he has met the boy. We at the Daily Prophet only have one question. Where has our boy, who lived, been all these years? Sirius Black, London, England. Sirius Black was pacing back and forth in front of the hearth at his family's ancestral home. The once dark and dreary townhouse gutted and renovated years prior when his mother had passed, removing all manner of cursed and dark objects from the house. The once dark home now was much lighter in color and atmosphere. White, silver, gold, and red now were the colors of the home, with a more open floor plan and welcoming atmosphere. The thought of his mother would have hated it had always made Sirius smile. The only two rooms that were ordered to not be touched were that of the family library on the 3rd floor, and Regulus' room. No matter if he had joined her, he was still his brother, and Sirius couldn't bring himself to destroy what was the last thing he had of Regulus. You knew pacing isn't going to make time go by faster, Padfoot, Remus says from a chair by the hearth. His feet were up on a stool, and he was reading the morning edition of the Daily Prophet that Sirius had not touched while sipping his morning tea, looking the picture of a relaxed scholar. I know that, Mooney, Sirius says, stopping to run his hand through his hair. I can't help it. Our meeting with Corey is in 20 minutes and Dumbledore still isn't here, Sirius says with a sigh. Sirius and Harry had written back and forth for the last few weeks. In that time, Sirius had learned a lot about Harry's life with the woman who had raised him, Corey Despoina. Honestly, if one would ask Sirius, he would say the woman had done a better job than he thought he would have done. Harry had told him about growing up in his summers in New York, about his older sister who was an artist with DOA records and going to her shows. Harry had told him a lot about Corey. She sounded like a fair and firm mother who was unbelievable scary when pissed off. Harry wrote about her as if she was Lily, and honestly, Sirius could understand that, his own mother being the sadistic she was. He had often thought of Euphemia as the mother he had always wanted. It is unusual for him to be late, but he is a rather busy man, and as I said, we still have 20 minutes, Remus says, so take a seat, relax, and have a cuppa for God's sake. Moony tells him, and Sirius sighs as he takes a seat on the other side of Remus as he flicks his wand towards Sirius' cold cuppa, warming it up for him. Sirius picks it up and blows on it before taking a sip and leaning back. His head is full of thoughts about the upcoming meeting. Sirius wanted Harry in his life, and that went without question, but was ripping him away from the woman he called family for the last 10 years worth it? He didn't think so. The woman had let him go to Hogwarts knowing what it would stir up, all for the boy's happiness. That wasn't even mentioning how Harry would react to it all. Sirius didn't doubt Harry would hate him for doing it, kidnapped or not. The woman was still the one who raised him, and from what he could tell, raised him well. Harry had a love for life and all things in it, trying to make friends wherever he went, even in Slytherin. He lived for a laugh and harmless pranks that would cause them. James kid or not, the boy was a marauder. He had told Sirius about all his friends at the summer camp he went to, the pranks he had pulled there, and the joy he found making people smile and laugh. If a child is a reflection of the parents who raised him, then Harry himself was a testament to the woman he spoke so kindly of. But Sirius wasn't going to let this opportunity to reclaim his godson slip through his fingers, not after searching for him for the last 10 years. Every lead brought to him, every possible sighting of him, every rumor of the boy Sirius and Remus had chased down over the years, but it had always ended in disappointment until Harry had walked into Hogwarts to get sorted. Looking back up at the clock, Sirius sighs. Their meeting was in 5 minutes. Remus looks up as well and frowns. It wasn't like Dumbledore to be late for something he had deemed important, but Sirius was done waiting for the old headmaster. So he and Remus both stood and left number 12, Grimmauld Place, and locking up behind them before checking the street before both disappeared with a crack, to reappear in an alleyway in downtown London. They were given an address by Harry in Muggle London, and following it they arrived outside the Claridge's Hotel, an upscale hotel in downtown London. Sirius whistles at the sight. Harry wasn't lying when he said Corey and her husband were well off, but it shouldn't be surprising. With the whole record studio thing, Remus looks over to him before they both shrug before heading inside and up to the front desk. The woman at the front desk took their names before telling them they were expected, and head to the top floor to meet with Ms. Despoina, and was given a room number before taking the lift to the top. After a few more minutes, they were knocking on the door to room 462. They didn't have to wait for long as the door opens up to reveal a strikingly beautiful woman. She was shorter than both of them by about a head with deep brown eyes that were almost black. She was wearing a pair of black pants that, in Sirius' opinion, should be illegal with how tight they looked on her. And she had a light yellow shirt, with ivy growing around a skull that had DOA under it. On top of her head was a ski cap with more skulls and roses on it with her hair tucked inside. She had opened the door with a large smile before it slowly faded as she looked confused, poking her head out looking up and down the halls, before looking back at the two men she speaks, her voice high like chimes with the same accent that Harry had. "You two aren't the gigolos I ordered," she says, sounding disappointed. Sirius and Remus were taken aback at the woman's words. All they could do was blink and gape at the woman, before her face began to change from one of disappointment to amusement, with a smirk stretching across her face before it hit the two men. Remus snorts and shakes his head as Sirius throws his own back and lets out a bark-like laugh before the woman giggles at the both of them. "Sorry about that," she says with a grin. It was the first thing that came to mind, as Remus sighs before sticking out his hand. "No problem at all, ma'am," Remus says with a small grin of his own. "We're the type that respects a good joke. Remus Lupin, a pleasure to meet you," he says, introducing himself. The woman steps past his hand, throwing her arms around the man, surprising Remus as she pulls him into a hug. "Nice to meet you, Remus," she says with cheer in her voice, before pulling back from the man with a smile threatening to split her face. "I'm Corey Despoina," she says before turning to Sirius and hugging him as well. And you must be Sirius Black. It's nice to meet you as well. Come on in, I'll put the kettle on. The two men step into the luxury suite, to find most of it filled with flowers of all kinds. Roses, dahlia, peonies, belladonna, foxglove, daffodil, wisteria, and on the mantel above the fireplace were red spider lilies standing tall and proud like some kind of centerpiece or memorial to the whole room. Finding a small table in the sitting room with 4 chairs around it, Remus and Sirius take a seat and wait for their host to return, looking around the room at the flowers. Towards one of the windows sat a half-completed painting of the street below. Everything in the room was decorated to be bright and open, much like the woman who was staying in it. Before long, Corey returns with a tea tray and sets it down before taking a seat across from them and beginning to pour some into 3 of the 4 cups. "So, I thought another person was showing up?" Corey asks, not looking up from her task. "The headmaster of Hogwarts, if I remember correctly," she says before putting a cup in front of each of them. Sirius and Remus look at each other before Sirius reaches for his tea, and Remus answers, "Well, yes, unfortunately. The headmaster is being held up by something. As to what that something is, we have no clue," the scarred man says with a small, apologetic smile. Corey just frowns. "Rather rude of him, but it's fine," she says, brushing it off as Sirius finally fixes his tea to his liking before taking almost choking at the taste, his eyes wide as he draws his head back from the cup. "Is something wrong with the tea?" Corey asks, not the least bit offended, but with a curious tone to her voice. "Merlin, no," Sirius says as Remus and Corey look at him. "Sorry, it just caught me off guard. Haven't had this blend in, well, a long time," he says before taking another sip with a small smile. "It was Lily's favorite blend," Corey says with a smile and a sad look in her eyes. "Last I heard, she was converting James to it." Corey shakes her head in fondness. Sirius watches Remus take a sip of the tea before watching the man's lips twitch as a soft fondness enters his eyes. "You knew her, Lily, that is?" Sirius asks, and Corey smiles just a bit larger before nodding. "We met in New York in the summer of '79. She was researching something to do with cheating death. We met at a fair on Long Island. And she was something else." Corey sighs out the last 2 words, fondly remembering the brilliant red head caught under the lights of the fairgrounds. "Is that where she met him?" Remus asks, breaking Corey from her memories. "Him?" Corey asks, sounding confused. "Harry's biological father?" The werewolf asks, raising a brow. "Oh," Corey says, No, they met a few months later in England, right after Lily's and James' big fight," she says with a slight coloring to her cheeks. Both men remember that it was their first huge fight since they got together. James had found some dark and questionable tomes in Lily's personal library, and they had a huge row over it to the point they broke up for a few months. James had left the cottage and moved in with Sirius for that time. He had refused to ask Lily to leave even in the middle of his anger. He still wanted to protect her, and Lily never once refused to let him in the house. All his stuff was there after all. They made up after he had found out Lily was pregnant and wanted to do the right thing and asked her to marry him. We were told James and Harry's biological father met before. Sirius says that James had asked to blood adopt Harry as his own kid, and your brother didn't have a problem with it. The last scion of the House of Black says. "Yeah, they met a few months after Harry was born," Corey confirms. "Harry was a bit of an obstacle between him and Lily. He is rather busy most of the year with his work and all, and felt that he would make a poor father," Corey says before she takes another sip of her tea. "Don't get me wrong, he loves Harry very much and would do anything and everything that it would take to protect him. But as I said, they're very busy during most of the year, so when James asked, he had agreed because he could see James was a brave and honorable man," she says with a smile that was shared with both of the men. She sighs before placing her cup down. "When we heard of their deaths, we were heartbroken. The world lost a brave man and a brilliant and beautiful woman. And I know it's late to say this, but I'm sorry for the loss you two had suffered that night," Corey says, looking down at her cup, and both men fall quiet as feel the old pain of lost well up in their chest. And Remus sighs. "It seems," Remus says with a soft smile as Corey looks back at the 2 men, "that we aren't the only ones that lost people dear to them that night," Sirius finishes, looking Corey in the eyes. Corey smiles with the 2 men before turning to Sirius. "We also owe you an apology, Mr. Black. I swear we didn't know that Harry had a godfather. If we did, we would have contacted you. We would have let you see him, raise him, Get to know him, I swear it, Corey tells Sirius. And Sirius could hear the sincerity in her voice, but he still frowns. He didn't know what to say, thanks to the actions of this woman's brother. He had lost out on 10 years of fulfilling the duty he had sworn himself to. So he doesn't answer, just looks down at his cup of tea, unable to answer. I know, Corey says. I know that doesn't make up for all the lost time, all the years for you. But I swear we didn't know. The last time we saw Lily and James was for the blood adoption ritual, and they didn't say anything about you. I'm sorry, so sorry that we did that to you. The woman says, tears start to collect in the corners of her eyes. So she takes a moment to wipe them away. I can't even begin to imagine that happening to us. To lose Harry and not know where he was for all those years, gods. The pain we must have caused you. I know for a fact if that had happened to us, Harry's father would have torn the world apart trying to find him to hell with any of the consequences, she says, unable to stop the tears now. But please, Mr. Black, please, 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 don't take him away from me, please. He's my son. I love him, Corey says, choking out a sob just at the thought of losing any access to Harry. I can't lose him. It would break my heart, she says, looking back down at her cup, tears flowing freely. Could Sirius do it? Could he rip away what was essentially this woman's child from her? She had raised him for 10 years, watching him grow, seeing his first steps, filling his life with such warmth and love that it reflected off everything the boy did and said. She was the one that had tucked him in at night, read his stories, calmed him from nightmares, and smothered him with all the love in her heart, treating him as if he was her own child and raising him like that too. As Sirius looks across the table at the woman who had raised his godson for 10 years and felt the memories of Euphemia Potter raise up from the depths of his mind, he knew his answer. Call me Sirius, please, the man says. And I don't want to take Harry away from someone who had raised him and loves him as much as I see you do. But I don't want to be left out of his life any longer, Sirius tells Corey. I've missed so much of it already. Maybe we can work something out, the last of the Black says with a small smile as he watches the woman across from him let out a shuddering breath of relief. Thank you, Sirius, Corey says while trying to wipe away her worried tears as Sirius smiles at the woman. With Harry being at Hogwarts most of the year, maybe we can split the summer, alternate holidays or something like that, Corey says, swallowing thickly. Sirius sighs out as Remus watches the both of them, silently sipping his tea before speaking. If I may make a suggestion, the scarred man says, placing down his cup, perhaps you two can wait to make the arrangements until a weekend, where we can go pull Harry out of school for an afternoon, Remus says. As far as I've seen, Harry is very mature for his age, and this isn't something that he should be left out of, he says with a shrug as Corey and Sirius looks at him. That sounds fine by me, Corey says with a smile. But if this is going to happen, and it will, I promise, there are just some things you need to know about Harry, very important things, Corey says, hesitating a bit with her words. Things? Sirius asks. What sort of things? His eyes narrowed a bit at Corey as the woman started to fidget in her seat. But as Corey opens her mouth to explain, there was a knock at the door. All three occupants look at each other, all thinking that the fourth member of their little meeting had arrived. And as Corey stands to welcome him, the door unlocks and 6 people walk in. One was, indeed, Albus Dumbledore, but instead of the joyful face with twinkling eyes that Sirius and Remus had come to know so well, it was set in a grim and serious look. Walking in behind him were 4 men in red cloaks with wands out, pointed at Corey. The last man was the current Minister of Magic, Cornelius Fudge. His eyes darted around looking at the room before falling on Corey. This is her then, Albus, the minister says as he steps up beside the headmaster, and the old man nods. I do believe so, Cornelius, Dumbledore says, his tone matching his face. Right, Ms. Despoina, or whatever your real name is, Fudge says. You are under arrest for fraud, attempting to defraud the Wixen Isles, forgery of government documents, helping kidnap a national treasure, and aiding and abetting said kidnapper. The minister says before Remus and Sirius stand and begin to protest, wanted to know what the hell was going on, but Fudge just ignores them. Worse, take her away, he says. Agent Jonathan Doe. They had gotten the warning late, far too late. Someone high up in the ICW had made inquiries into the adoption of Harry Potter and Makusa, and they hadn't caught in time to come up with official paperwork for it. The boy was on the registry of all known and claimed demigods that the DOMC had, and arguably the most important one after Talia Grace. Had anyone thought to tell the Department of Miscontrol that Harry Potter was going back to his home country of England to attend Hogwarts? The DOMC would have concocted a cover story with all the proper paperwork to smooth things over. But much like the demigods they sired, the gods really ever thought about the little things before they acted. So, Agent Doe rushed through the Ministry of Magic, hoping and praying he wasn't too late to stop what was sure to happen before if he did nothing. As he walks down toward the Oro offices, he hears them before he sees him. Please, if you just contact the DOMC in Makusa, they'll explain everything. This is obviously an oversight of some kind. A woman's voice echoes from around the corner, and Agent Doe inwardly sighs. Sure, now she remembers they exist for this exact reason. Ms. Despoina, I have contacted 3 different departments in the States, 2 on the magical side, 1 on the muggle side, and none of them have records of you or your adoption of one Harry Potter. The Supreme Mugwump of the ICW says, the only conclusion that I can come to is that you have lied to young Harry about almost everything. We will get to the bottom of this, I assure you. Dumbledore says as Agent Doe shoves a few people out of his way while rounding the corner before seeing a group of men surrounding the goddess hiding among them. Supreme Mugwump, sir, Doe yells as he jogs up, and the man himself stops and turns to Agent Doe with a confused expression. Dumbledore looks at the younger man that runs up to him. He was dressed in a muggle 3-piece pinstripe suit that was rather fitting on him. He was a quite pale, but still young and rather handsome face, and his salt and pepper hair looked as if it was normally combed back was tousled from jogging up to him. He had dark brown eyes that would almost look black without the witch-fire lamps burning in the halls of the ministry. Yes, Dumbledore asks. May I help you, good sir? The headmaster asks, looking into the man's eyes. Yes, sir. I'm Agent Jonathan Doe of the DOMC from America. Agent Doe says, sticking out his hand to shake the Supreme Mugwump's hand as the group he was with stops. Lady Despoina looking at him in relief. I'm very sorry about all this. There seems to be a mix-up at a few of our offices in the States. We are moving to digitize our files, and a few things got lost in all the upheaval. One of those things being Lady Despoina documentation and her adoption of one Harry Potter, the agent says as he reaches into the inner pocket of his suit to pull out some paperwork before handing it to Dumbledore, who takes it to unfold and begins to look it over. As you can see, this has all been a huge mistake, mostly on our part, one admit, but I'm sure if we can all sit down, we can clear up any misunderstandings about this. Agent Doe explains quickly, his eyes flicking over to Lady Despoina. Why and how she let them put cuffs on her he'll never understand. But he really needed to get them off of her before this becomes worse than it is. Now, if we can just take the cuffs off of Lady Despoina but before Agent Doe could finish what he was going to say, he is cut off by another voice belonging to a small man with a green bowler hat. Absolutely not, he states as both Dumbledore and Doe turn to the man. She is being charged with kidnapping at most, aiding in the kidnapping at the very least, of one of our national heroes. The man says. Kidnapping? What kidnapping? Agent Doe asks. The boy was left abandoned on the steps of his nomage relatives. One of his biological parents found him and brought him back to the States, the agent says as Dumbledore narrows his eyes at the man who knew a bit too much about what happened to Harry that night. After which he was adopted by Lady Despoina. The boy had no immediate family left other than the person who took him. That is not a crime, Doe says, but Fudge refuses to listen. No. The man didn't have the right to do so. He hadn't signed the birth certificate, and he was not present or active in the boy's life beforehand. So no, we are moving forward with the charges. Whatever custody this woman thought she had was rendered null and void the moment she stepped onto the aisles, the man says, looking Agent Doe in the eyes. Now, out of respect of our closest allies, we will not move immediately to trail and wait for you to get a team in place for the woman's defense. But after her interrogation, she will remain in Azkaban until then, he says with a nod to the Aurors around Lady Despoina. I'm sorry, who are you? The agent asks the ranting man. Cornelius Fudge, Minister of Magic. The minister spits out as if he was insulted. Agent Doe watches as the Aurors try to move Lady Despoina along, but are surprised when she doesn't budge. Lady Despoina. Jonathan Doe says slowly and very carefully, please, just give me more time. Just go along with it all for now. I'll get this cleared up in no time, please. the agent says with a note of panic in his voice. I'm sure I can smooth this over. I just need a little more dash, but Jonathan is cut off by a whisper that makes him paler than normal in the witchfire. No, Lady Despoina whispers as she looks down at the floor, and all the men turn to her as the agent takes a step back. My lady, please. Let's not do anything as dash, Agent Doe says, his voice pleading, close to begging the woman, but he's once again cut off by her. They are trying to take my son, Corey yells. And with her yell, the floor beneath cracks in a web around her as she looks up towards the agent and Dumbledore, and both men watch as the last of the brown starts to melt from her eyes, turning them as black as the void. Agent Doe swallows nervously as he takes another, larger step back. I tried to do this the right way, I tried, Corey says before she whispers the last two words before she turns to one of the men, not in aura robes, but in a black leather jacket. When you see Harry again, will you tell him that Corey tried to do this the right way? She asks the man, and after a moment of pause, he nods slowly. Thank you, Sirius. I really hope you don't get caught up in what's to come. I liked you, Corey says softly to the man who was looking at her with wide eyes. I can't make you do what I want, Corey says, looking first at Fudge, then at Dumbledore. I'm not as scary or intimidating as my husband, nor as powerful as my mother, the goddess in hiding says as she reaches up, grabbing her ski hat and pulling off and letting her hair fall free. Her white roots had almost completely taken over her black hair. Now, there was but 2 or 3 inches of the black left. But unfortunately for all of you, I know someone who is... Corey didn't speak the words of a threat, but more of a promise of what was to come, and no man in the hallway could mistake the dread and power that settled over them coming from anywhere else. Stun her, the minister quickly says, and the Aurors raise their wands, casting the spell as Agent Doe begins to walk backward away from what was to be the blast radius, and ideally notes that Dumbledore and the 2 other men that Corey had spoken to do the same. The spells hit their target, but fizzle and die before they could even touch her skin as Corey closes her eyes and looks back down, letting out a breath that turns to white mist in the air. As summer begins and all life thrives, I walk this world alive, but with the turning of the sun, autumn comes, and my descent begins again. Corey whispers words of ancient power, causing a cold pit full of dread to burrow its way into the guts of all the men standing around her. They watch in fascination as the black bleeds out of her hair with every word. And as winter bares its frozen fangs, I eat my wings that have kept me tamed, for the throne I now reclaim, and all life will die. Corey roars as the walls, ceiling, and floor shatter around her. The Aurors and the minister who is closest to her scream in pain as winter's fangs dig deep into their flesh, freezing it black and solid as ice. Fudge falls backwards and shatters into pieces like glass. As Corey speaks, her form begins to shift and twist as if she was standing in front of a multitude of funhouse mirrors, becoming taller and leaner, the last of the brown leaving her eyes, leaving them as black as coal and endless as the night sky. The clothes she had worn shift and twist like smoke and snow in a storm, creating a long black dress fit for a queen, as an ivory crown with 6 tiny rubies fitted in it forms above her head before it slowly lowers on her head. And as the crown rests on the queen's head, she speaks the final words. So is the will of dread Persephone. Corey says the final words in a whisper, just as her eyes roll into the back of her head, and she begins to collapse just before a skull as large as a whale and black as obsidian breaks through the floor, swallowing Corey whole before it pulls her into the depths of the underworld. And as Corey dies, and the dead sing and rejoice at the return of their queen. Oh, fuck, is the only thing that Jonathan Doe could say as he watches the worst possible outcome unfold in front of him. Dread Persephone, as she appears in her domain once again. The goddess of the dead stumbles as she stands, her hand pressing against her forehead to quell the throbbing headache just behind her eyes. She barely hears Hades' shock at her appearance, and she begins to understand why. It was late September, early, far too early for her to be here. Corey should have had another month or 2 before she had to make her descent to the underworld while Persephone slept within her, so why? Why did she force the change so early? Then Corey's memories from the last few months begin to flood her mind. Harry going to Hogwarts. No, he was supposed to go to Ilvermorny. The letters from Harry telling her of meeting a godfather. She didn't know he had one of those. meeting the man, and then, Persephone, my love, what are you dash? Hades tries to say before his wife looks up at him, rage burning in her eyes, and he is taken aback, and just before Persephone lets out a soul-tearing scream, he has just enough time to summon a shield of shadows around it before Persephone lets loose. He hears the scream echo throughout the underworld, her rage shaking the world above, and the strain on his powers to keep his wife from brutally murdering him in that rage. What in the nine hells happened to piss her off so badly? Only one thought drifted through his mind, Harry. Something had happened to the boy that wasn't good, far, far from it. As Hades drops his shield, he surveys the damage dealt to his castle. Well, what was his castle? The only things left standing were his and Persephone's thrones. Everything else that was his formidable and intimidating black fortress was nothing but rubble, ash, dust, and ice. Hades turns back to his wife. And if it wasn't for the fact that he was worried for her, if not a little bit terrified of her, he would be incredibly turned on by the look on her face. She looked like the queen that had once granted him a place by her side to rule, after the war with the Titans, when he showed up in the underworld only to find her. Their battle that had lasted weeks turned into a heated passion made of torn clothes and shaking the earth as they made love, still covered in the wounds that had received from one another. But Hades had far more control of himself than his younger brother, and slowly and very carefully approached his queen. They're trying to take him, Persephone says in between deep breaths as she tries to calm herself. They're trying to take my son from me, she says, stopping Hades short with a deep frown on his face. And what will you do? Hades asks, stopping from approaching Persephone before folding his hands behind his back and standing tall. Persephone turns on her heel and begins to walk forward toward the entrance of the underworld. What else, my love? The Queen of the Dead says, I'm going to pick him up from school and take him home, she says in a calm voice that betrays the rage she feels just beneath her skin. You do realize the effect you have on the world above when you walk it, my dear. Do you believe it wise? Hades asks, sounding as if he doesn't care either way. I don't care. I'm going to go get my son, Persephone growls out, and Hades tries to feel pity for the mortals that had drawn her wrath, but honestly couldn't find it. As Persephone makes her way out of the underworld the old-fashioned way, she tries to regain control of her temper and sort through Corey's memories. She had told Milanoe not to let Harry talk Corey into letting him attend Hogwarts. She had ordered her not to let it happen, but of course, her daughter would be a little rebel to the end. Ever since Harry had freed her from her cave, she's given that boy anything he wanted, the two little troublemakers. Persephone stops only once on her journey to pet Cerberus before continuing on to the Styxes. Having no patience to wait for that lazy boatman, she snaps her fingers to freeze the waters before walking over them and up the stairs that lead to the world of the living before slamming the door to Karen's office open. The god himself jumps 10 feet out of his chair before falling to the ground and looking up at who had just came into his office from the underworld before growing pale and punching himself to his feet quickly. And my lady, Sharon sputters out, bowing at the waist. I was not expecting you so early. How may I be of service? He asks, but Persephone ignores him as she moves out of his office and into the waiting room of DOA Records. The waiting room, like always, was filled with ghosts who quickly move out of her way as she made her way to the door. Getting to the door, she stops and turned her head to the left. There was a group of demigods, children about the same again as Harry, 9 in total. Some wore armor, the others just the orange shirt of Camp Half-Blood, and 2 had only what they took from home on their way to camp. She felt their deaths wash over her and knew how each had died. They died bravely in the face of death, and that was something she could not let go of. So with a sigh, she turns around and waves her hand, and the sounds of coins hitting Karen's desk, 18 in total. For the children, Sharon, she tells the lazy boatman. And if they are still here by the time I come back, we are going to have a talk. Do you understand me? Persephone tells Sharon, who nods quickly and waves the kids through just before Persephone steps out into the mortal world for the first time in over 11 years. It was an unfortunate fact that Persephone couldn't leave the underworld as quickly as her husband Hades could. While she could force shadows to do her bidding, it did have a limit. She could not travel through them herself. She was simply too powerful, too big to squeeze through them. Her husband, while powerful in his own right, had access to them through his divine domain and could bypass that little fact with his helm. She had no such luck. She was the opposite of Kore. She was destruction, and she was the absence of all life, which is why when she had stepped onto the streets of Los Angeles, a cold wind blew through the city. For while other gods had to force the weather to change, Persephone changed it just for being on the mortal plane. She was a walking natural disaster. As the mortals around her try to bundle up against the coming cold, Persephone closes her eyes, twisting the world in her palm to find where she needs to go. It had already been hours since Kore had left England. Her descent took time to complete, and when rushed it could go badly for everyone. But even with the throbbing headache, she quickly finds where she needs to go, Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, and will but thought she opens her eyes to find the castle standing before her. She turns her head south, and she could feel Milanoe close by on the islands. Persephone could feel her daughter's panic when Milanoe figured out who had just stepped on this godless land. And Persephone smiles. She would deal with the little rebel later. For now, she had a few mortals to put in check. With that thought in mind, she marches up the sloping grass hill toward the front door of the castle. Persephone could feel the wards trying to keep her out, but she quickly and quietly shuts down the wards. If the castle was left standing after she was done, she would turn them back on before she left. As she walks towards the front door, wherever the trail of her dress went, plant life died, and frost and ice took their life as the temperature around the castle plummets as the Queen of the Dead comes calling. It takes little time to get to the front door, and with but a small motion of her hand, they fly open. To me, shades of the dead, Persephone whispers her commands to the ancient castle, and in moments the entrance hall is flooded with ghosts. She could feel one stubbornly ignoring her orders, sticking to his classroom full of students. But he didn't matter and let the binding order on him go as she turns to one of the bowing dead before her. Bloodstains caked onto his outfit from 1,000 years ago. "You," Persephone calls to him, and he lifts his head, eyes wide with fear. "The headmaster's office now," she orders, and he raises from his kneeling position as she dismisses the rest. "At once, my queen," the ghost of the man says before leading her up the grand staircase, the steps freezing over as she climbs it. The shade leads her deeper into the castle, past classrooms both in use and empty. She could feel divinity at the very roots of the castle that felt similar to her power, but altogether different. Whatever it was, seemed content to let her walk through the castle unmolested. But she could feel the whispers of the ancient castle asking and begging to spare the students from her wrath. It could not watch them all die again. Persephone ignored it. She would uproot this whole island and sink it into the ocean if it meant her son would float to the top of it. The ghost soon stops and points down a hallway. "Just at the end of the corridor, my queen," he says. "Just past the gargoyle, you'll find the stairs that lead to the headmaster's tower." He informs her with a bow of his head, and Persephone flicks her fingers, sending the specter sailing through the castle and away from her. She continues up to the guardian stone statue and swipes her hand before it, reducing it to ash and dust before climbing the stairs she finds behind it upwards. As she climbs, she hears the voices of 3 men talking in panicked voices. "I told you I could handle it. I invited you because I thought you might want to help smooth things over. Knot it up, Albus!" One man roars angrily. "Look what happened. Fudge is dead. 3 Aurors are severely injured. And let's not forget Kore is now gone. What the hell am I going to tell Harry?" He roars, as another man tries to calm him down. "Sirius, yelling at the headmaster isn't going to fix this. While I understand your anger and agree with it, calmer minds must prevail," the voice says as Kore's memories of the 2 men drifted through Persephone's mind. Kore had liked these 2, and Sirius was Harry's godfather. Good, Persephone thought. She wanted to express her disappointment with him personally. "Thank you, Remus." The elderly voice of the headmaster drifts down the stairs. "While I agree with you, Sirius is well within his right to be angry with me. But my boy, you must understand I was just trying to help," Dumbledore says. "Meddle more like it," Persephone hears Sirius say, and understood why Kore had liked the man. He indeed wore his heart on his sleeve. "Be that as it may," Persephone hears the old man say as she makes it to the landing just before the office door. "I am far more worried about what Agent Doe said. If this Kore is indeed as dangerous as he implied, we need to be prepared when she shows back up again. And Persephone snorts, there was not a thing that walked this world that could be a threat to her. The only thing that could stop her were the three highest orders, and they didn't take a tangible form. What makes you think she'll show back up so soon? The voice of Remus Lupin says, just before the door to the office crumbles before her into dust, and she steps through. Oh, I would say it's a pretty good bet, Persephone says as the three men whip around with wands drawn. Now, where's my son? The Queen of the Dead whispers dangerously. Harry Potter. Harry was having a bad day. He had hardly gotten sleep the night before, thanks to Draco's whining about how he was hanging out with Hermione, and woke up nervous. Today was the day that Corey and Sirius were to meet, and he knew something had gone horribly wrong in the middle of defense when he had felt faint and almost blacked out as a deep chill settled over him. Corey had made her descent early, far too early. He could feel it through the domain of the dead as it sang out in joy as one of its oldest and most powerful goddesses came back to her full terrifying power. But as Harry stood in herbology, tending to a screaming bell in between Hermione and a boy named Neville, he felt a bone-deep chill settle over him as dread began to build up in him. He grasps the side of the planter and prays and hopes it's just his nerves and powers acting up. He couldn't shake off the feeling of how wrong he was. "Harry, are you feeling okay?" Hermione asks him, and he nods. "Yeah, just nerves is all. Just give me a moment," Harry tells her. "Okay," Hermione says, "but if you're not feeling well, you should really go to Hose Dash," and whatever she was about to say is cut off by a gasp, and she wasn't the only one who gasped. The greenhouse begins to fill with them, and Harry opens his eyes and looks around. The screaming bells were all withering and dying along with every other plant life in the greenhouse as frost began to creep up and cover the windows. Harry curses under his breath. Persephone was here, and she was pissed, before turning to Professor Sprout that seemed just as shocked as her students, and deciding the detention was worth saving the whole bloody school from his mother's wrath. Harry bolts from the greenhouse, running at full speed to the castle and pulling on the domain of the dead. He calls to any ghost near him, and to Harry's relief, one shows up, the fat monk from his first night here. He looks at Harry confused as he follows alongside him. "My mother, Persephone. She's here? Where?" Harry asks / orders the ghost to tell him. "To the headmaster's office, young prince," the monk says. "She did not seem happy when she got here," he tells Harry as the boy takes a corner and bolts up a flight of stairs. "Yeah, no shit," Harry tells him. "Lead me there now." He tells the monk, who nods and flies just ahead of him to lead him to Harry's mother. Thankfully, it doesn't take long to get to the corridor that leads to the headmaster's tower. The pile of dust and trail of ice was hard to miss as well. And that wasn't good. That meant Persephone was mad. So with that in mind, Harry takes the stairs two at a time, trying to avoid the ice, but failing as the top step and falling down. "I will not ask again, you old goat," screams the voice of Persephone. "Where is my son? Where are you hiding him?" She screams louder, and Harry feels the whole castle shake with her rage as he looks up and past the door leading to the headmaster's office. It was a hurricane of crumbling books and silver instruments as Persephone was holding Dumbledore off the ground by his throat. She had Sirius and Remus suspended in the air by her power alone as they choked and gasped for air that would not come. He catches Sirius' eyes, wide with panic. The man shakes his head, mimicking the words "stay back" with his lips because he was unable to speak. Harry feels the tower about to buckle, honestly impressed that it had lasted this long under his mother's wrath. Harry picks himself off the floor and charges into the room, heedless of Sirius' shaking head telling him not to. But Harry knew there were only three things that could calm his mother's wrath when she got like this. The first thing was Hades. He would drag her off to their room for hours, doing the gods know what to stop her rampage. Melione was the second. She would sing and make the dead dance to calm Persephone down and entertain her. Then there was himself. His way was far easier than his older sister's singing or whatever would exhaust Hades and Persephone. So Harry charges and jumps into the whirlwind of death and destruction that surrounded Persephone, yelling at the top of his lungs. "Emma!" Harry yells as he sails through the air, arms wide open as Persephone turns her head and her black eyes fall on Harry. Hug attack. The boy who lives screams before he is scooped out of the air by his mother and gets crushed to her chest as she drops the old headmaster, and the storm of destruction dies, and Remus and Sirius fall to the floor, finally able to breathe. After snatching Harry from the air, Persephone spins in place before falling to her knees and hugging Harry to her, as if he was the only true thing she valued in the living world, and Harry clings to her like a baby koala bear as she speaks softly to him. "Harry, oh my baby boy, I was so worried. They tried to take you from me, but here you are, back with me," she says as she rocks side to side to comfort herself more than Harry. "It's okay, Mom. I'm not going anywhere. I'm right here. No one is going to take me from you," Harry says softly despite his rapidly beating heart. He could have easily died there. If Persephone hadn't recognized his voice, she would have turned him to dust. But they tried, Harry. They tried, and Corey panicked and descended early to have me handle them, Persephone whispers. "No one's going to take me away, Mom," Harry says to her before speaking louder. "Isn't that right, guys?" As he hears the three men in the room begin to crawl back from the epicenter of the storm that was Persephone's rage. Sirius coughs before answering in a hoarse voice. "Wasn't in my original plan, no," the man says with a groan as he begins to pick himself off the floor, pulling his old friend up with him and turning to face the pale woman glaring at him with hellfire in her eyes. "Lair," Persephone hisses out at him. "You were going along with them. You were going to take my son away from me. I'm going to flay Dash," but she stops her threat as Harry squeezes her again, and she squeezes back. "What the hell else was I supposed to do, Corey, when Albus and the fucking minister walk in with a squad of Aurors and tell me they have proof you faked all the documentation, that you lied to Harry?" Sirius spits back at her. "I still don't know if you fake everything or not because you left spectacularly, killing the minister on your way out," Sirius says, really not knowing why he was back talking a being that his curses literally died against as they hit her. But here he was. Albus is finally able to get to his feet with the help of Remus, breathing heavily and holding a hand to his sore and abused throat, and leaning against his half-destroyed desk, looking at Persephone with no small amount of fear in his eyes. Persephone begins to stand, peeling Harry off of herself easily, making him stand behind her as she begins to approach Sirius. His back was against the wall, but even if it wasn't, Sirius would not back down from this. He would get his godson back in his life or die trying. "I faked nothing. He is my child by birth and by right," the Queen of the Dead says through a snarl. "When we felt Lily's passing, we were beyond grief. Corey couldn't deal with the emotions and choose to descend early to process them," she says, towering over Sirius. "It took me hours to find my son. I had to follow the stench of death that had clung to him after finding her body. And where did I find him?" Persephone rounds on Dumbledore next, abandoned, on a doorstep, at the end of autumn, with nothing but a letter and a coat wrapped around him to keep him warm. She yells at Dumbledore, who stands his ground as well, but with a slight flinch of guilt. "Oh, Mom," Harry says, tugging on her black dress. "The coat. I found out where the coat came from. I completely forgot to tell Corey," Harry says excitedly, and Persephone turns to him. "You did, honey?" Persephone says with the brightest smiles and softest voice, and Harry nods vigorously. "Where did it come from?" She asks like she was generally curious, like any mother would with their child who wanted to show them something. And Harry points to Sirius, hoping to at least protect him from Persephone's wrath. Persephone turns back to Sirius with narrowed, suspicious eyes. "You gave him the jacket?" she asks in a whisper. Sirius nods once. "I was the first person there after it all happened. I found them and Harry crying in the crib. It was getting cold that night, and I don't want him to get sick," he says, and as Persephone looks him in the eyes, she could see them haunted by age-old regrets and ghosts. "So, I wrap him in my jacket before handing him off to Hagrid when I met him outside," Sirius admits before Persephone looms over him once again. "And why didn't you keep him with you?" the goddess asks through clenched teeth. "You are Harry's godfather, are you not? Lily had to have picked you for a reason? Why did you not stay with the boy?" Persephone asked, her tone demanding answers from him. "Because the man who betrayed them and was responsible for their death was still alive," Sirius says back, his voice edging on anger at the woman for questioning him. "Was it my smartest move? No, but Harry was going behind a ward that would have protected him from any danger to him from the outside, and I wasn't about to suffer the rat to live a moment longer than I would let him," Sirius says, looking at the woman right in the eyes, unflinching. Persephone's eyes widen. She didn't know that Lily was betrayed, Her face twists into a rage as the barely contains the domain of destruction that wanted to run rampant in the room once again. Name, she hisses out. Give me the name of the one who betrayed them. Persephone demands as she slams her hand into the wall beside Sirius' head and leans into his face. And Sirius answers. Peter Pettigrew. Sirius growls out the hated name. Persephone's eyes flick left to right looking for something before they widen, and she smiles a dark smile. Good, she says under her breath before turning back to Sirius. Harry is leaving with me, she says, but Sirius quickly cuts her off. Like hell he is, he says in a growl, just before he feels the cold wind of the Scotland Highlands hit his back as Persephone disintegrates the wall behind him. Excuse me? The Queen of the Dead asks. I wasn't asking Sirius. I was telling you, she hisses in his face. And I don't follow orders really well. You can ask Albus, Sirius says. I just found Harry again. Like hell I'm letting him go so soon. The man says with steel in his voice. He'd fight her if he had to, one-sided or not. He wasn't going to let Harry go without a fight. Persephone searches his eyes, looking for something. Her eyes stop moving as she finds it, and she smiles. She leans back from Sirius, standing back at full height as she looks down at him with her black eyes dancing in amusement. You're a brave one, Sirius Black, she says, and Harry lets out the breath he was holding. James Potter was a brave one too. He did not cower or flinch in the face of death. In the face of me, when he had first asked to adopt Harry. You're lucky I like that, she says as she turns away from him before summoning, with a wave of her hand, a throne of black iron and bones before sitting down on it facing the three men. Like the queen she was, you wished to parley with Corey before. Well, Corey is very much asleep right now, so you'll be dealing with me. So Sirius or I in black. What is your offer? The Queen of the Dead says with a smirk. A walking corpse. Olivia Twist was walking down a corridor that led to the headmaster's office. She was still on the ground floor, but that's where she was going at a lazy pace. She had felt an odd rumble in the castle while nursing her hangover when her 7th-year class was quietly studying Inferi and how to destroy them. Honestly, they didn't need a whole chapter on it. Just slap the world fire on the page right after them, and it would get the message across well enough. Unless the people reading the books were complete idiots, though they probably were. But the rumble wasn't big enough to feel unless you were paying attention to something like it, or using a clemency to close one's mind to the pain that was existing with a hangover. Which means Snape probably noticed it. Olivia makes it up the stairs to the 3rd-floor landing, walking swiftly toward the corridor that leads to the old goat's office. But before she could make it around the corner, another person comes from around it. While normally not unusual if it was a student, or a professor, or a giant bat or goat, this person was dressed as a queen. A dress so black it looked as if it was woven out of shadow and smoke. Pale skin and eyes as black as pitch. She even had a fucking crown on. She walked with confidence down the hall like she had nothing to fear as she spun a pale, white wand between her fingers on one hand and the other folded behind her back. Olivia had stopped to look at the woman with narrowed eyes, wondering who she was. But the woman paid her no mind as she walked right past her. Olivia had thought she would continue on her way, that was that. But as the woman passed her, she slowed down. Even the spinning of the wand slowed down until she stopped completely, before slowly turning her head to look at Olivia with her unnerving black eyes. May I help you? Olivia asks with a raised brow, before the woman turns and faces her, tilting her head like she was studying Olivia. It oddly enough reminded her of the brat. The woman tucks the hand that had the wand in it behind her back as she advances on Olivia, and Olivia's wand slips into her hand out of line of sight of the woman. The woman stops inches from Olivia, looking at her in the eyes, like they were piercing her soul, before she speaks. Tamsin Riddle, she says, and it takes all of Olivia's years of perfecting her poker face to look unbothered by the name. I'm sorry, who? Olivia asks, raising a brow, playing dumb. Just before pain like fire crawls up her body as the woman sinks her claw, like nails into the rotting flesh of the body she was wearing like a suit. Olivia chokes back a scream as she swings her wand hand up, only for her wrist to be grabbed and forced above her head as she is slammed bodily into the wall behind her, the nails digging deeper into her flesh. Do not play coy with me, mortal. The woman hissed an inch from her face. You know exactly who I speak of. I'm speaking of you, the shade of a wraith riding in an ill-suited body breaking down to feed your magic. The woman spits in her face and pushes her fingers deeper into the rotting flesh of Olivia's body. Olivia's free hand goes for the hand, digging into her to pull it out, but it was like iron and would not budge. Olivia did scream then. "Listen to me closely, mortal," the woman says. "If you hurt him, if he has one accident, if one hair is out of place when he returns to me, fate's dictation or not, I will hunt you down," she tells Olivia, moving her head to keep their eyes locked as Olivia squirms in her grip. "I already have one of your parasitic soul shards. I can and will hunt down the rest. And there is not a hole you can crawl into or a rock your slimy soul can slither under that I won't find you," she says. "Do you understand me?" And Olivia has no choice but to grit her teeth and nod her head. The woman pulls her claws from Olivia's side, and as pus and coagulated blood leak from Olivia's wounds, the woman in the black dress turns and leaves with a snarl. Olivia almost blacked out from the pain as she made her way back to her living quarters. She had to pull her coat over her wound to hide it, as she pushed through a sea of students that were in her way on their way to dinner. When she finally made it back to her bedroom, she had to down the rest of the unicorn blood potion before passing out in her chair that sat by the hearth in her bedroom. She would be awakened hours later by Snape pounding on her door before he pressed his wand to her throat, demanding where she had been for the last few hours. When she had informed him that her curse had acted up and she was sleeping off, he had snarled at her before summoning her house elf to confirm it, which it did. Olivia got her final surprise of the day when she had asked the overgrown bat what his problem was. "My problem, Twist," Snape said with sneering at her, "is that the headmaster is dead," before with a sweep of his cloak he had left the shocked Olivia behind. Surprised yes, random update on this story. And holy shit, what an update. Persephone finally showed up and went all Queen of the Dead on the poor fools who thought they could cross her. And well, Albus is dead. That's a thing that happened. The poor man had good intentions, but bad execution in them. I also may have lied about getting to the Harry dying part of the story, and that's my bad, but I swear it will happen next chapter. We also meet Milanoe. She's gonna be fun. King saxcuL. Harry Potter dies at the end. Well, it's about time I updated this little story. Not sure how long this chapter will be, but I think we will be getting to Harry's death by the end. Well, without further ado, tune in, turn up, and drop out for the next chapter of The Boy Who Vanished. On with the show. A rotting body. It had been 3 weeks since the death of Albus Dumbledore, and she couldn't believe her luck. The old goat finally kicked the bucket the same school year that her glorious rebirth was going to happen. It was a shame that Fool Fudge had died as well. The old minister would have been a useful pawn on the board to use during her oncoming rise to power, but she'll honestly take the trade-off with Dumbledore's death as well. The old goat was entombed on the school grounds, which she found oddly fitting for him. He dedicated his life to Hogwarts and the better of the school he loved so much. Once she had taken over the cesspit of a country, she might even let him stay. But his memorial service was beautiful, the speakers passionate, and the burial was done in accordance with the old Roman ways. And she had cried at the right times and mourned with all the other teachers and students at the school. She had long ago mastered what emotions to show even if she felt nothing, but now, 3 weeks after his death, Olivia Twist was going to celebrate Albus Dumbledore's death in the way she always planned, by dancing naked and drunk on his grave while chanting she had won in the end. And she was almost there. 20 minutes before curfew, Olivia was making her way down the grand staircase with a bottle of fire whiskey in her hand and a smile on her face. Truly, this was the best month ever. But as soon as she steps onto the ground floor of Hogwarts, she feels a shiver run down her spine. Olivia leaned back with a painful groan escaping her mouth. She knew this feeling. It was a signal from the wards that protected the third-floor corridor. Someone had broken into the out-of-bounds corridor that hid the entrance to the crypts under the school where the stone was hidden, meaning someone was trying to steal her stone, something she wouldn't allow. So, with a sigh, she places her whiskey down by the stairs before turning around and heading up the stairs as her wand drops into her hand. "I'm going to skin whatever little fuck got past the wards if that fucking dog didn't get to them first," Olivia thinks to herself as anger begins to build in her chest. She begins to run up the grand staircase, ignoring the stabbing pain in her side from where the mysterious woman had inflicted on her. By the time she made it to the third-floor corridor, she was out of breath and sweating bullets. She pulled out a vial of unicorn blood potion and downed it without even checking it first. Olivia slips the vial back in her pocket as she turns the corner to find McGonagall and Severus already standing outside the door with wands drawn. They both turn to look at her as she walks around the corner. Olivia sees Severus narrow his eyes at her, probably surprised at it. Wasn't her behind the door? McGonagall opens her mouth to say something, but Olivia immediately puts a finger to her lips to silence her, before gesturing to both of them and pointing to either side of the door to stack up against. Much to Olivia's surprise, they both had enough brain cells to understand what she wanted and enough presence of mind to do as she told them to do. Olivia continues to make gestures with her hands, explaining her breaching plan to both of them. McGonagall was to open the door to allow her and Snape entrance. She would enter first, followed by Snape, and McGonagall would enter last to defend them against any return fire. On the count of 3, the door was thrown open by McGonagall, and Olivia quickly stepped into the room with her wand raised and a curse on her lips as she felt Severus enter right after her. But at the sight of what was in the room, stopped all 3 teachers in their tracks. "Who's a good boy?" "You are." "Yes, you are." The unmistakable voice of one Harry Goddamn Potter, who was currently sitting on the chest of the Cerberus and giving the giant 3-head dog belly scratches. All 3 of the teachers looked upon the sight in both shock and horror. A 4X magical beast was lying on its back, paws in the air, and tongues hanging out of all 3 mouths as its back legs kicked, in enjoyment as a student was giving it belly scratches. The first one to break was Olivia with a laugh. A deep, full belly laugh that spiraled into mad giggles as she dropped to her hands and knees to hold herself up as she laughed at the sight before her. McGonagall huffed and looked as if she didn't know if she wanted to start yelling or join Olivia on the floor laughing, but in the end, she just threw her hands in the air before storming out of the chamber. Severus looked furious at the sight, doubly so when Harry turned and looked at them all with a surprised face before smiling at them. "Did you know there was a Cerberus here?" the boy asked over Olivia's laughter. "These things are awesome," he said with a large grin. Harry Potter or not, at least the cheeky brat was making this year interesting. A dying boy. Harry was hiding in an alcove, blanketed by the ghostly powers of his divine mother and lying in wait for his next victim with a smile on his face. He peeks around the corner, hoping someone will stumble upon his trap soon and secretly hoping it is one of the teachers of the school. Everyone had been in such a gloomy mood after the old headmaster died, which was fair, but it had been weeks since that happened, and for some reason, no one seemed to be celebrating the old man's life. Then again, death always had odd effects on those who lacked an understanding of it. Everyone thought that death was an end, which in a way it was, but it was also a new beginning. Souls tend to move through the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. The old headmaster would come back in a few years if he was lucky, and if his mom didn't deem him a soul in need of punishment, which Harry honestly doubted. Killing his current life was punishment enough for what he had tried to do, and very few modern souls got the punishments of old. Harry was pretty sure Hitler was the last one, and he got the pineapple treatment, which honestly sounded uncomfortable. So with all the gloominess in the castle, Harry went on a spree of setting up pranks all across the school in hopes of lighting up the mood. Nothing too bad, just a few motion-triggered traps that change the colors of people's clothes or make their voices high and squeaky for the rest of the day. Things that Harry thought that Dumbledore would have gotten a laugh out of if he was still alive. "Oh, man, this is going to be great," Harry whispers to himself with a large grin on his face, not expecting someone to answer him. "What is?" another voice asks right behind him. "Ah!" Harry screams and leaps away from his hiding spot, a hand shooting behind his back to where the Despoina was clipped to his belt, but stops short when he sees who it is, Hogwarts' very own rotting corpse, Professor Twist. "Don't do that!" Harry hisses at her, his hand dropping to his side before straightening himself back up from the crouch he landed in as Twist chuckles at him. "Maybe you should be paying attention to your surroundings more," Twist says, her lips twisting into a smile. "But what are you doing, Mr. Potter? Not causing any trouble, are you?" she asks with a raised brow. "What? Me? No," Harry says, his words trailing off as he tries to give his professor the biggest smile he can. A smile that would normally get him out of trouble, but all Olivia does is narrow her eyes at the boy. "For some reason, I can't find myself believing a word of that," Twist says flatly as she shakes her head and crosses her arms. Perhaps it's time for you to return to your common room before I find some reason to drag you off to detention, she says, leaving the boy little choice but to sigh and nod his head. Fine, I already have detention with Snape after the whole Cerberus thing, Harry says dejectedly as he deflates with a frown. He turns around and crams his hands into the pockets of his robe before he starts to walk away from his defense teacher. How did you do that? Twist asks, curious about it herself. She'd been banging her head against the wall for the last few weeks, trying to figure out a way past Hagrid's damnable mutt. She had moved on to thinking of a way to bribe the man in some way for the information. Harry stops and looks back at her with a frown. Well, if it's anything like the one my stepdad has, Fluffy could probably be put to sleep with some music. He says with a shrug, Wait, Fluffy? That thing has a name? Professor Twist asks, her face twisting into an unsure look, like she wanted to be impressed that Harry knew the three-headed dog's name, and shocked that the mad beast had a name at all. Well, duh. All dogs do. It was on his collar. My stepdad named his Spot, the boy says with a wide grin. But all I did was pet and play with him. He seemed lonely, Harry says before tilting his head back, his brow scrunched up in thought with a frown on his face. Kinda like you, in fact, he says before looking back at his professor as she blinks at him in surprise. Mr. Potter? Professor Twist? Leave before I curse you. Yes, ma'am, Harry says with a grin as he snaps a salute to his teacher before turning on his heel and running off deeper into the castle, not wanting to test if she was being facetious or not. Harry would be turning the corner to the grand staircase when he heard Professor Twist screaming from down the hall. Potter! Echoed behind him, and he couldn't help but cackle at the top of his lungs. Guess she doesn't like her clothes in pink and orange, he thought to himself as he took the stairs two at a time. Below Stone's Nest, Chinatown, London, October 31st, 8:35 p.m., the dead child was sitting in a pub in the middle of London on the day he was going to die a bit irresponsible? Probably. Was it worth it to watch the live performance of Mel and the Ghost Riot? Absolutely. It started in the morning over a breakfast of pancakes and sausage. Harry was having a bit of trouble cutting the fluffy pads of fried batter due to his fingers going numb. That was normally the first sign, numbness in the extremities. It was followed by nausea around lunch with the numbness crawling up his arms and legs to where he felt like he was walking on pins and needles. By evening, he has a shortness of breath and begins to lose color in his face, which makes for a sickly sight, which is probably why Sirius was keeping a close eye on him. Sirius had shown up in the middle of breakfast to jailbreak him out of school for the day, even had Professor McGonagall's, who was now acting headmaster till she either got the position permanently or a new headmaster was instated, permission and everything. Sirius wanted to take him to see his parents' graves, to leave flowers and all that jazz. Harry quickly agreed with Sirius' plans before running down to the Slytherin dorms to quickly change his clothes into something more mundane. They had made their way to Godric's Hollow via apparition, which, while really freaking cool, also had Harry puking all over the groan, which also had Sirius laughing at him. They had made their way to the old churchyard to lay flowers at their graves, Harry smiling softly as he did. Even with his mother being the queen of the underworld, he had never met James and Lily Potter. They were in Elysium, of course, for their heroic deeds at the end of their lives. Persephone had personally made sure both Lily and James made it to the Isles of the Blessed. The single drawback was that Harry could no longer see them, for no mortal or god might step foot in Elysium, a place made for the greatest heroes. Not even Persephone, the creator of that law, would break it. But Harry was okay with that. He had a great and loving family, and he knew that neither Lily or James would hold it against him. Besides, he'd see them once more one day. After the graveyard visit, Sirius took him on a small tour of Godric Hollow, showing Harry some war memorial made in his family honor. He thought it was kind of stupid. Then they swung by the cottage that Harry once stayed in. Sirius had offered to break them in so they could grab a few things, but Harry turned him down. Harry didn't want to dig up the past, and much rather let it rest where it was. But when Sirius had asked what he wanted to do for the rest of the day they had together, Harry only had an answer of what he wanted to do that night. He had pulled out a flyer from the inside pocket of his jacket and handed it over with a smile. It was an advertisement for a live show at one of the old pubs down in London, for a band Harry knew very well. Sirius had smiled and nodded his head, telling Harry that they could go to the show later in the day. They had killed time by going to the Nomage movie theater and wandering around Diagon Alley checking out random shops and eating snacks. Sirius would tell him stories of James and Lily that got Harry smiling as he reminisced about some of their greatest pranks. In Hogwarts, Harry was just happy knowing more about his mortal parents and their lives. By the time 8 rolled around, Sirius and Harry had rushed off to downtown London to catch the show, setting up in one of the balconies that looked down on the ground floor. Harry bobbed his head to the sounds of electric guitars, the beat of the drums, and the voice of the lead singer as he sang along with her. He knew all the songs by heart by now for the simple fact that he would sit in on the singer rehearsing at DOA Studios. The lead singer was tall, pale, and punk rock with her hip-hugging black denim jeans and torn-up queen shirt with a fishnet undershirt you can see running down her arms. Her short two-tone color hair of black on one side and stark white on the other swung side to side as she belted out the lyrics to her morbid and dark songs set to an upbeat and catchy tune. Harry knew her for the simple fact that she was his older sister, Milanoe, the Princess of Terror. With another set complete, the minor goddess of the dead smiles as she takes a bow before the crowd that was around her. "Thank you. Thank you. You're all far too kind to little old me," Milanoe says into the mic she holds. "Now, with the clock running down on this most spooky of nights, we got just enough time to play one more song before we take a short break." She tells the crowd cheering around her as she walks in a circle around her undead bandmates. Not that the mortals knew that. "So, let's hear some suggestions for all of you to shout them out for me," she says into the mic. As the people gathered around started to shout some of the early songs from her set, or songs that they wanted Milanoe to cover. Harry leans over the balcony and, cupping his hands around his mouth, he shouts as loud as he can. "Necromancin' Dancin'! Play Necromancin' Dancin'!" He yells with a grin, causing Milanoe to stop her pacing to turn around in surprise at the sound of Harry's voice. Her eyes quickly search the upper balconies till her pale blue eyes stop on him, and she smiles. "Well, sounds like someone is a super fan," Milanoe says with a matching grin before walking back to the middle of the stage and placing her microphone back into its stand. "The next song, ladies and gentlemen, is a little number called Necromancin' Dancin'. Now dash," she says with a small smirk as she looks over the crowd before raising a single hand. "Let's make some evil," and snaps her fingers, causing the lights in the pub to cut out to the surprise of the audience. As soon as the lights cut out, an upbeat tune begins to play, reminding Sirius of the old swing music that James' mom and dad listened to around the house. "This is it. Now we've found it. I'm astounded. Every town will be surrounded by a throng of marching death. Delicious the riches. They glisten ahead." The lead singer's voice came out as rapid-fire words that mingled with one another in a quick cadence. It was rapid and upbeat that got you tapping your foot with the music as you tried and picked apart what the lyrics were about. As the lyrics come out swinging like a set of hips in a dance, black lights suddenly illuminate the pub in their spooky purple glow. The back lit up like neon green ghosts on stage, every curve and edge of fabric showing off either horrible wounds or giving them an otherworldly look. The lead singer, however, stuck out the most. It's a craze. They'll devour every hour of these endless, non-progressive inundations of their kind. And lucky for you, you're the next one in line. It seemed as if she had changed outfits in an instant. Gone was the London punk rock look and was now replaced by a royal gown of some kind. It drifted off her like smoke or mist as its bright white, tinted with a pale green look in the blacklight, seemed awfully close to the color of the ghosts that wandered the halls of Hogwarts. The white half of her hair was caught in a breeze that no one else could feel and lifted from her head, forming one half of a crown as she continued to belt out the lyrics of her song. "When I'm necromancing, everyone's dancing. No one can stop me. I dare you to try. The dead are infused with sensational groove, and they're coming for you now. There's nowhere to hide." As the cadence of her song slows down a bit, her skin becomes translucent, showing bones that lay underneath as Milanoe's grinning skull could be seen as she raised her hand. All throughout the pub, people start screaming in terror as ghosts begin to rise from the floor, the picture of horrible deaths they suffered in life. They begin to fill the pub with a cold mist as they fly through the air, screaming and wailing in tune with the song that Milanoe sang for both the living and the dead. "Yeah, waltzing forth, here they come. I'm raising the dead. Everyone, turn and run. I'm loving the dread, killer moves that will stun. Let's make some evil. Milanoe sings as her band of ghosts back her up with the whispers of the dead. The screams of terror and surprise turns into cheers and laughter as the mortals that crowd the pub all believe it to be nothing more than special effects somehow, as the band goes on playing and the Princess of Ghosts prepares for her second verse with a haunting. Laughter. Sirius Black, Below Stone's Nest, Chinatown, London, October 31st, 9:01 p.m. Sirius had to admit his godson had an amazing pick in music, getting chewed out by Minnie when they got back to Hogwarts, so late was well worth the show he got to watch with Harry. How he had bobbed his head and sang along with the lead singer with a large smile on his face was worth a lot more seeing him so happy. No matter how he felt about Persephone, he could gladly admit that Corey had raised Harry with love and care that Lily and James would be proud of. But as the night was winding to a close and the band took a break from their performance to mingle with the crowd, Sirius had finished the single pint he allowed himself. He didn't want to splinch himself or Harry while operating to Hogwarts. Just like the Muggles had drunk driving laws, the magical world had a warning about teleporting drunk. Sirius pulls out a wad of Muggle money to leave a small tip for the pleasant serving girl that had checked on him, and Harry throughout the show as he turns to look at Harry, only to find Harry not where he should have been by the guardrail, overlooking the ground floor. Sirius looks around his immediate area with a frown. Now where did that little troublemaker get off to? He thinks to himself as he spins in his seat to look behind him. Well, what's cooking good looking? A new voice says, dripping with sex appeal and mischief. The response that escaped Sirius' mouth was mostly automatic in response to the flirtatious tone. Hopefully breakfast in the morning for me and you, Sirius says, spinning back around with a charming smile, only to come face to face with the lead singer of the band that was just playing. She was dressed how she was before the last song they played in the last set, with a large smile painted across her face. She throws her head back and lets out a loud, joy-filled laugh before looking back at Sirius with a sparkle filling her pale blue eyes. Smooth operator, my kind of guy, she says with a flirtatious smile before all of a sudden stuck her hand out to her left to grab Harry by the face as he jumped out from behind another patron screaming B.O. at the top of his lungs. "Aw, man," Harry says, his shoulders slumping as the woman just turns to him unsurprised and with a far fonder smile on her face. "Come on, Munchkin. You know you have to get me pretty in the morning if you want to scare me," the woman says with a small laugh as she removes her hand from Harry's face, while Harry was smiling as well. "But you don't sleep," Harry says with a pout before crossing his arms over his chest in a show of disappointment. "I know," the woman says with a wink at Harry before turning back to look at Sirius, who was watching the two interact with a quirk on his lips. "Milanoe, you must be Sirius Black, yeah?" She introduces herself as she sticks out her hand across the table for Sirius to shake. Sirius takes her hands and shakes it. "Yeah, I am. I'm guessing you know Harry," he asks with narrowed eyes at the girl. "Well, I would hope so, seeing that he's my little brother and all that," Milanoe says as she lets go of Sirius' hand and leaning back in her seat. Though he's more of a little terror with how he acts half the time, she admits with a grin as she reaches out and ruffles Harry's hair. The boy makes a show of swatting her hand away, but couldn't hide the smile on his face. "Like you're any better," Harry says as he rolls his eyes at his older sister before taking a seat at the table. "Harry, I'm the goddess of terror and ghost. I'm supposed to cause trouble wherever I go, especially on Halloween of all days," Milanoe says with a grin before it falls a bit a second later. "Which reminds me, what are you doing here so late? You know what happens tonight. You shouldn't be out this late," she says, her voice laced with worry about something unsaid. How she spoke causes Sirius to frown as he looks between the two siblings. "What do you mean by that?" Sirius asks with a raised brow, only for Milanoe to turn to him with a surprised look before her eyes widen and she rounds on Harry. "Harry Zagreus Potter." Milanoe near shouts Harry's full name, causing the boy to flinch. "Do not tell me that you didn't tell him what happens on Halloween." She snaps at her younger brother, who cringes into himself and gives Milanoe a sheepish smile. Milanoe throws her hands into the air with a groan of exasperation before glaring at Harry. "Harry, I'm all for being a bit irresponsible, but there is a line," she berates Harry. "Wait, what happens?" Sirius tries to cut in, but Harry shots back at his older sister. "I just want to come see you and the guys play. Besides, it's not even That lat dash, Harry starts to say, but as he speaks, a white mist escapes his mouth, slowing his words as an odd look overtakes his face, as if he was confused by something. But it's not dash, he tries to say, before his eyes roll into the back of his head, and he slides off his chair. Harry! Both Milanoe and Sirius shout as Milanoe catches Harry before he hits the floor. Fuck! The little idiot didn't think of the time zones. Milanoe curses under her breath as she scoops up Harry into her arms before rounding on a shocked Sirius. We need to go now, she says to him before turning and begins to run for the closest exit. Wait! What is happening? What's wrong with Harry? Sirius yells as he chases after Milanoe through the pub and up the stairs to the ground floor. No time. We need somewhere private. Do you have a house or something? She asks as she slams open the back door of the pub that led into an alley. Yeah, it's not too far away, Sirius says, sounding as scared as he felt. As Milanoe rounds on him, he could see how pale Harry was getting. Black veins covering his face and crawling down his neck while his hair was turning white as snow. Sirius focused. Where is it? Think of it. Milanoe snaps at him, bringing Sirius's attention back to her. His childhood home flashes through his mind as he feels ghost-like fingers crossed over his mind. Got it, Milanoe says before vanishing from where she stood, cradling Harry. Sirius blinks in shock at the show of power before shaking his head and spinning on his heel and disappearing in a crack. He reappears in front of Grimmauld Place just in time to watch Milanoe charge up the stairs and phase right through the door, wards and all, with Sirius only a few steps behind her. Sirius bursts through the front door as Milanoe starts taking the steps 3 at a time to the second floor. With the full moon out, Sirius wasn't worried about Remus, as he would be in the basements under the effects of the Wolfsbane potion and not in his room like normal. Second door to the right. That's his room, Sirius calls out quickly before following Milanoe up the stairs. The door to what was Harry's room was already open by the time he gets to the top of the stairs. He enters the room just in time to see Milanoe lay Harry down on the bed. What the hell is happening to him? What's wrong? Sirius half screams in panic. Milanoe has a sad look on her face, her eyes never leaving Harry as she answers him in a hollow-sounding voice. He's dying, she says, stopping Sirius' panic in its tracks. What? The master of the house says, his voice sounding little to his normal loud and lively tone of voice. I can't believe he didn't tell you, the foolish munchkin, Milanoe says as she reaches down and brushes a lock of Harry's hair out of his face. Can't you stop it? Can't you help him? Sirius snaps at the Milanoe. You're a goddess, right? Help him, he yells, but all Milanoe does is shake her head sadly. I can't. Not even my mother has the power to stop this. Trust me, she's tried. Harry Potter will always die on October 31st, she says with a sad smile on her face as Sirius backs away from the bed, horror and heartbreak on his face. Little moron should have told you, she says with a sigh and a shake of her head. I didn't want him to worry, Harry says weakly, his eyes cracking open a bit as he tries to smile at his big sister. Thought I had more tea time, he admits as his head dips down as if he was trying to fight off going to sleep. Milanoe just shakes her head, a tear running down her cheek. You should have checked the time zones, you airhead, she says with a sad smile as Harry lets out a weak chuckle. Probab. Aight. Harry slurs as his head drifts back and forth for a moment before landing on Sirius. Sorry, Pat Wadfu. He tries to apologize but comes even more slurred than before. I had Adfu fun too, he admits with a weak smile before closing his eyes. No. No. Harry, open your eyes. Harry, please. Open your eyes. This is a joke. A prank, right? Right. Sirius babbles, going to his godson's side and taking his hand into his own. Harry felt so cold as the white mist left his mouth one last time as his chest stopped moving. Right? Sirius says in a small and broken voice. He had just got him back. He was going to finally fulfill his oath to Lily and James. He was going to be the best dogfather he could be as long as Harry would have him in his life. But now he was gone. He's gone, Sirius, Milanoe says with a deep, sad sigh as she reaches over and places a hand on Sirius' shoulder in a show of support as a sob rips through Sirius's chest. I just got him back at how? I don't dash, Sirius says with tears in his eyes as he continues to cradle Harry's ice-cold hand in his own, in a small fruitless hope to bring some warmth back to his godson. I'm sorry, Sirius, Milanoe says softly before giving the man's shoulder a squeeze. He probably didn't want you to worry about him. He's like that, always trying to help others, always trying to get people to laugh and enjoy the small moments in life because he knows how short a life can be. Milanoe explains before pulling her hand away from Sirius with a shake of her head and a soft smile. That's one of the reasons he is just so damn lovable, she admits with a soft laugh. Welp, time to wake up the other one, Milanoe says with a bigger grin before popping her pinky into her mouth and covering it with saliva before leaning forward to jam it into Harry's ear. Wet Willy, she says with a laugh as Sirius looks up at her in horror, only for the body of Harry Potter to jerk to the side with a scream. Ah, fuck. The body screams before taking a spill over the other side of the bed after ripping his hand out of Sirius' shocked grasp, only for Harry's head to pop back over the edge of the bed, one hand covering the ear that Milanoe wedged her wet finger into. What the fuck, Mal? That dis dash, the body of Harry Potter tries to say, his eyes opening to show not emerald eyes, but a royal purple. His words get stuck in his throat as he begins to heave and gag. Luckily, Milanoe already has a bin in hand to hand over to him before he promptly becomes sick. Disgusting, the body of Harry Potter moans, finishing his sentence as he finishes puking. Love you too, Zag, Milanoe says as she starts to laugh at the sight of a zombie Harry puking into a basket. What the actual fuck? Sirius says, looking on at the scene before him, shock and confusion coloring every inch of his face. Milanoe was laughing and pointing at a white hair and purple-eyed Harry as Harry was once more heaving into the bin he was holding. So, introductions, Milanoe says, clapping her hands with a smile as the not Harry looks up and around the room confused. Zag, this is one Sirius Orion Black. Harry's, and technically yours, godfather, she says as she gestures to the still kneeling and surprised mortal in the room. Oh shit, we have one of those? Zombie Harry asks in surprise and much regret as he vomits again. Harry probably wrote it down, Milanoe says with a wave of her hand as Zombie Harry begins to pat the pockets of his leather jacket, looking for something. Sirius, allow me to introduce you to godson number 2. One Zagreus Potter, the son of Corey and Hades, and the god of Rebirth, Milanoe says with a smile as she gestures to the confused god in mortal flesh as he pulls out a small journal from one of the inner pockets. Found it, Zagreus says with a relieved sigh before looking over at Sirius and blinking twice. Sup? He asks with a half grin. Chapter done. The song in this chapter is called Necromancin' Dancin' by Ghost Bear. Really good song, highly suggest a listen to it when you reread this chapter. And oh, boy was this chapter been in the back burner for the last 2 fucking years. But I'ma be honest, I don't know if I'll continue this series because, in my head, it would have a lot of what I already did in my Heir to the Hunt series and I'd rather not just repeat myself. But I have had the idea of doing this up to the end of second year, in flashes after I flesh some things out a bit with all the characters before, just doing Camp Half-Blood stuff and the wacky adventures Harry would go on there. But the temptation to put Scat Hack in this story is too real, also to ship her with Zagreus. Anyway, I'll wait a moment for all of the like for people who guessed what was going to happen to Harry to pat themselves on the back for figuring it out so easily. Okay, now that that's done, let's all welcome Zagreus, the god of Rebirth, to the cast. For the record, I have never played Hades the game. I knew about Zagreus long before that game came out. But Zag is the reason that Harry is so fucking OP in this. He has a literal god as a twin that wakes up every time Harry dies. Why is that? Well, if I ever write another chapter of this, I'll give an explanation to it. Hope it was worth the wait. King saxcuL out.